Chapter 40-27. She was in a lot of pain, but she endured it. She gently poked his heart with one finger. Don't tell me that you've fallen in love with me. You weren't like this before. You were very decisive. She was frivolous, but Kong Qiao's face was full of pain. For what reason he didn't know. The faith he once held on to was quietly crumbling in his heart. He felt a little uncomfortable, so he was eager to make up for it. Su Mo continued to stare at him with a hint of provocation in his eyes. She smiled lazily. All right, Kong Qiao, let go of me. I have a guest. As soon as she finished speaking, he kissed her fiercely. Kong Qiao kissed her deeply, as if he wanted to suck her into his soul. He was hungry and thirsty. When she struggled, he grabbed her hair and bit her neck fiercely, like a male animal forcing a female animal to mate. Kong Qiao tasted blood and let go of Su Mo's neck. He murmured hoarsely, I can also give you money. Su Mo felt the pain in her neck. She reached out and gently touched it. Then she looked at Kong Qiao. She said softly, this time, I don't want to sell it. Mr. Kong, you have to respect yourself. On her thin face, there were midnight eyes. Kong Qiao had never seen such eyes. Were they the eyes of an angel? He suddenly felt that he and Su Mo were people from two different worlds. He let go of her and took a step back. He smiled faintly. You're right. I have to respect myself. He felt a stabbing pain in his heart. He had never felt so gloomy before. In his world, there was only darkness, only fame, wealth, and women. He had always enjoyed the life of luxury. There had never been a moment when he felt that he was living like a zombie. He used to think that he did all this for Wen Yuan. But when he could no longer be with Wen Yuan, he became used to this kind of life. Once he was used to being provoked, he wanted to escape. So he let go of Su Mo's hand. Kong Qiao took a few steps back. He took out a cigarette and lit it. That's it. As he smoked, he left. He sat in the car. He didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he sat quietly. An hour later, Su Mo came out of the restaurant. Her face was even paler than before. She said goodbye to those so-called clients and saw them off one by one. Her bowing manner made Kong Qiao very uncomfortable. Is this the life she wants, Angel? He felt like a grandson. He watched her quietly as he smoked. He had thought she would go home after seeing them off, but she ran to the side of the road. He vomited loudly. Kong Qiao was stunned for a moment. Then he stubbed out the cigarette, opened the car door, got out, and walked behind her. Why do you have to force yourself? His voice sounded behind her. Su Mo was still vomiting. She didn't turn around until she had vomited all the food in her stomach. You haven't left yet? Under the moonlight, Kong Qiao stared at her, his whole body flowing with nobility. As for her, she was in a sorry state. Su Mo slowly took a tissue to wipe himself clean, and looked at Kong Qiao. Are you here to laugh at me? Miss Angel, who is contributing to humanity, why would I laugh at you? Kong Qiao's voice was filled with mockery. He then whispered, if you don't want to drink and drive, I'll send you back. End of this chapter. Hurry up and read the latest update. 4M. Chapter 40-28. Su Mo lowered her eyes and got into the car with him. Maybe she was too tired. Kong Qiao tilted his head and looked at her tired face. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gotten into his car. She hated him so much. Kong Qiao pursed his thin lips and turned on the navigation while driving. He tried to ask her casually, where do you live now? He asked twice, but she didn't answer. He thought she was asleep, so he stopped the car. Su Mo's face was abnormally pale. He reached out and found that it was very cold. Kong Qiao was shocked. He immediately started the car and drove to the nearest hospital. He didn't know how many red lights he ran along the way. He touched her face from time to time. She must have been poisoned by alcohol. She drank herself to death for a little investment. Was she an angel or an idiot? 10 minutes later, Kong Qiao carried Su Mo to the emergency room of the hospital in the city center. Fortunately, the doctor on duty was an experienced doctor. He immediately said that it was alcohol poisoning. He didn't say anything about washing the stomach and intestines. Finally, the drip was put on. The doctor called Kong Qiao and said seriously, she'd better not drink in the future. She was lucky this time, but it doesn't mean that she will be lucky in the future. She's just a little bit away from organ failure. Kong Qiao nodded. I'll talk to her. The doctor paused. Also, your wife doesn't look very well. Pay attention to her nutrition. Wife. Kong Qiao was stunned, but he didn't refute. He talked with the doctor for a while before returning to the ward. Suemo was still unconscious. The two nurses were busy. They recognized Kong Qiao when they saw him come in. They exchanged glances and looked at the woman on the bed. That night, the nurse posted on her WeChat moments. The violin prince has a girlfriend. She just came to our hospital. They look very loving, and their eyes are full of love. The picture was taken secretly. It was Kong Qiao standing in front of the bed in black. His eyes were deep and bottomless, but for some reason, it made people think of one word, deep love. It was crazily reposted on WeChat moments. The hospital suddenly became an internet celebrity. There was a group of reporters waiting early the next morning. But this night was quiet. After the nurse left, Kong Qiao slowly sat down and looked up at the drip. There was a touch of confusion in his eyes. Then he sighed softly. So stupid. Indeed, Suemo was the kind of small creature that seemed to have a strong vitality, but was actually very fragile. To Concho, she seems to have no sense of direction. What does she live for? But he felt as if he hadn't made her understand. He sat in front of the bed, silently guarding her. Perhaps it was the last time. Their lives have always been different, Kong Qiao thought silently. Afterwards, he went out to smoke a few cigarettes. When he came back, Suemo seemed to be awake. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Her eyes parted slightly. They were pitch black and reminded him of a small, wounded animal. He hardened his heart and thought that even if she was injured, she was the one who asked for it. Suemo opened his mouth, his voice incredibly hoarse. Thank you. We can be considered old friends. He said coldly. The doctor said that you almost had kidney failure. I don't need to explain, right? You almost died. Even if you didn't die, you would probably be a cripple and have to lie in the hospital and be taken care of for the rest of your life. Suemo looked at him and said softly, I don't have any relatives left. Conxiao was stunned. End of this chapter. Chapter 4029. She looked at him and continued, I know Mr. Kong. Kong Qiao, if something happens to you, you still have family, but I have nothing. For a moment, her fragile look pierced Kong Qiao's darkest heart. It was as if a hand was gripping it tightly, and he felt pain when he moved. Sumo's eyes weren't fully opened. She continued, So I can't have anything happen to me. I won't drink anymore. He didn't feel good in his heart. Although he was very uncomfortable with what she had done before. And although he still hated her, seeing her like this and hearing her say that she had no family left, he felt very sad in his heart. He felt indescribably sad. It was like he wanted to pick up a kitten or a puppy on the side of the road. Of course, Kong Qiao didn't pick it up. He wasn't that stupid. He wasn't like Suemo, who wanted to be an angel in the world and almost drank himself to death. He would rather be a devil, the kind with a black heart. So he said, Suemo, this is the last time. We won't meet again. She chuckled. I think so too. As soon as she finished speaking, a palm covered her eyes and said coldly, The patient needs more rest. Suemo was stunned. He had already moved his hand away and chose to rest on the sofa, closing his eyes to rest. Suemo bit her lower lip, and the excessive weakness made her fall asleep again. Kong Qiao, on the other hand, opened his eyes and quietly looked at her sleeping face under the light. She was too thin. If he didn't pay attention, one day, she would really disappear from this world. But what did this have to do with him? Kong Qiao sneered in his heart. At dawn, he called Wen Yuan. It wasn't that he wanted to push the blame to Wen Yuan, but because Wen Yuan might be the only person in the world that Suemo had family with. Kong Qiao was nothing, and Wen Yuan was Xiang Monlian. Kong Qiao left. He deposited 100,000 yuan in the hospital bed account and asked the nurse to order a light breakfast. After doing his best, he was going to leave the white world and throw himself back into the life of luxury. That was his life. When the reporters surrounded him, Kong Qiao had already left. But when Wen Yuan and Yi Mubai came over, they were caught. Seeing so many reporters, Wen Yuan frowned and stared at his husband. Mubai, did Suemo accidentally provoke some big shot? Yi Mubai sniffled. You have to ask her about this. In his heart, he had roughly guessed that it might be someone, but he wasn't sure. Pushing open the door of the ward, Yi Mubai blocked the reporters outside, and then unkindly called the police, asking the police to deal with these guys who stared at mosquito blood for the sake of money. When Wen Yuan entered the ward, the nurse was talking to Suemo. She said softly, "Mr. Kong has already left, but he paid the hospital fees before he left. Also, breakfast was ordered by Mr. Kong." The nurse was extremely gentle. She had already confirmed that Kong Qiao and Suemo were having an affair. Sumo's complexion was still very bad. He listened quietly and squeezed out a smile. "Thank you. It's what we should do." The young nurse asked respectfully, "Do you want to get up and have some porridge?" Suemo nodded. "Help me adjust the bed. I'll sit up and eat by myself." Wen Yuan walked over and took the bowl from the nurse. "Let me do it." Suemo tilted her head. "Wen Yuan, why are you here?" Wen Yuan took his handbag and lightly hit her shoulder. "I came to see if you're hanging up." End of chapter. Hurry up and read the latest update. Chapter 40-30. Suemo groaned. It hurts, it hurts. Be gentle." Wen Yuan glared at her with a terrifying gaze. "You still know pain? I thought you didn't know pain." She poked Sumo's head. "You're drinking with me? Do you think you're drinking with me? Did Kong Qiao tell you that?" Suemo held her head and asked gloomily. Wen Yuan glared at her. "What do you think?" Suemo bit her lower lip. "It's just a sponsorship. What do you mean by drinking with me? Old Lin and the others are treating me like good buddies. Good buddies will force you to drink like this." Wen Yuan slapped her head again and glared at her. "Why didn't you tell me that you were short of money? You begged those guys and drank until you were in the hospital. Do you know that if you drank any more, you'd have to die?" Wen Yuan was fierce like a baby, but there was a hint of moisture in his eyes. "How disappointing." Suemo looked at Wen Yuan guiltily. "Kong Qiao told you about this too." Wen Yuan was still glaring at her. "What do you think?" "Suemo, I don't care. The next time you drink, I'll break up your nest and send everyone to the northwest to dig for coal. I'll make all the cats and dogs into hot pot." Although Suemo knew that she was talking nonsense, she couldn't help but retort. "Wen Yuan, you're so fierce." Wen Yuan glared at her. "Yes, I'm fierce." After staring at each other for a long time, Suemo suddenly said softly, "Okay, I promise you, I won't drink anymore." She paused for a moment. "Can I get someone to drink for me?" Wen Yuan was furious. "You really can't change your ways." Suemo lowered her eyes and said softly, "They all need a home and a lot of money. It's not easy to meet an honest person. So of course I have to rip him off." "Then you can rip me off." Wen Yuan bit his lips. "At most, I'll get Yi Mubai to sell himself to sleep with me." "Hey!" CEO Yi was unhappy and reminded his wife. "How did I end up like this?" Wen Yuan glared at him. "You're not willing?" CEO Yi lowered his nose. "How about you sleep with me, I'll pay you." He wrote a check and placed it in Sumo's palm. 50 million yuan for Wen Yuan for half a year. Why did he feel like he was dragging down two people? He had clearly married one woman, but he had raised such a big family. Fortunately, these people were easy to raise. Wen Yuan looked at the 50 million yuan and regretted it. She shouldn't have said that. It wasn't easy being Yi Mubai's mistress. He might torture her a lot. However, Suemo didn't have any morals. He accepted the check and smiled at Wen Yuan. "Thank you for your hard work." Wen Yuan gritted his teeth. However, her movements were still very gentle as she scooped the porridge. She said fiercely, "Open your mouth and eat. Vampire." Suemo smiled. Actually, she had family. Anyone in this world could abandon her, but not Wen Yuan. Well, Wen Yuan would even sell his body to support her. This feeling was pretty good. After that, Yi Mubai left, and Wen Yuan stayed in the hospital to take care of Suemo. Sumo asked her, "Don't you go to work?" "I'll take 2 days off to take care of a drunkard like you." Wen Yuan was still fierce. Suemo finished the porridge and leaned on her shoulder. She said softly, "Wen Yuan, actually, the home of love is not at the end of the line. I still have 70 to 80 million yuan. I just want to know if there are still good people in this world." For a moment, Wen Yuan was speechless. Tomorrow. Chapter 40-31. Suemo looked at her and put his hand on hers. Don't worry about me. Wen Yuan looked at her and asked her slowly. Then tell me what's going on with HIV. Suemo was stunned and looked at her for a long time before saying, It's just like that. I just happened to meet it. She paused. What did he say? He won't talk nonsense, will he? Wen Yuan snorted and looked at Suemo quietly. Okay, I'll tell you what happened last time. Suemo couldn't stand her like this. She hugged her arm and said softly, A while ago, Duo wasn't around. I don't know how he found me. Wen Yuan looked at her. So you slept with each other again? Suemo didn't say anything and looked at him carefully. Wen Yuan knew that his guess was right. He sighed. Why didn't you get married if you had such a tacit understanding? Suemo hugged her arm and put her chin on her knees. She said in a low voice, Maybe it's not the right time. How could Kong Qiao and Suemo be on the same channel? Besides, their worldviews were completely different. When Yuan put his hand on her shoulder and whispered, If you can't get up again, Kong Qiao is poison to you. It'll only be good if you stay away from her. Suemo knew that Kong Qiao was a celebrity. If she wasn't his girlfriend or wife, she would be in a difficult situation. Some fans were crazy. She nodded and said yes. When Yuan didn't make things difficult for her anymore. He let Suemo rest and took care of her. He even made her a nutritious lunch at noon. In the evening, Suemo felt much better and asked Wen Yuan to go home. Wen Yuan thought for a moment and decided to go back and come back the next morning. He reached out and pinched her face. I'll go back first. Don't run around. How can I run? Suemo smiled weakly. Go back. Don't worry. Wen Yuan confirmed again and again before going out. Yimubai's car had already arrived. Wen Yuan got in the car and looked at Yimubai. What's the matter? Why do you want me to go home? I was going to spend the night in the hospital. President Yi put his hands on the steering wheel and gently knocked it twice before whispering. Kong Qiao and Sumo's matter has spread. This time, it won't be settled by a small model. He tossed her the phone and started the car. Wen Yuan looked at him strangely, then looked down at his phone. It was a group photo of Kong Qiao, and Suemo was lying on the hospital bed, while Kong Qiao was sitting next to him. The emotions in her eyes were so strong that it was impossible to ignore them. Wen Yuan was stunned. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Mubai Kong Qiao. Like Suemo, Yimubai focused on the front, his voice a little cold. You should be more concerned about how Kong Qiao's agent will handle the PR this time. Wen Yuan was stunned again. He tilted his head and looked at Yimubai blankly. Well, will he choose true love? What he loves is himself. Yimubai's voice was heavy. If he decided to be with Suemo, he wouldn't have left. Wen Yuan, Kong Qiao has already made his choice. Wen Yuan was a little stunned and only responded after a long time. After that, she didn't say much. Her heart ached for Suemo. And only then did she understand why Suemo was so calm. Because it was impossible. Actually, it had never been Sumo's problem but Kong Qiao's. She could not imagine that the Kong Qiao in her heart was like this. Chapter 40-32. When the car arrived at the villa where they lived, Wen Yuan came back to his senses and unfastened his seat belt. Are we home? Yimubai got out of the car and waited for her to walk side by side. Wen Yuan suddenly put his face on his shoulder and said softly, Mubai. Yes. He responded softly and looked at his wife on his shoulder. What's wrong? She put one hand on his waist and half of her weight was on him. Her voice was very soft. Will you be like this? Yimubai was speechless. Wen Yuan, we are married. We are an old couple. Wen Yuan said, Oh, and held his hand. Like holding the right hand with the left hand? President Yi looked at her meaningfully. Wen Yuan smiled. He pinched her face. There will never be such a day. Probably because he was angry at her words. He threw Yi Hui to Xiangnan after dinner and took Wen Yuan back to the room. Yi Xiangnan looked at the time. It was only 8 o'clock. He took a long breath and said, You are so healthy. Little Yi Hui looked at her brother. She didn't understand what he meant. Of course, as her brother, he didn't want her to know. In the master bedroom, Wen Yuan lay in Yi Mubai's arms. After feeling that he was still restless, she reached out and hit him angrily. Yimubai grabbed her finger and bit it. Are we an old couple? Wen Yuan stared at him. He smiled. Well, don't be angry. You are not really uncomfortable. He lowered his voice. You tried your best to stop me from leaving just now, Wen Yuan. Is it comfortable? She didn't want to say anything to satisfy him, so she snorted softly. He smiled and slowly rubbed the place where he had touched her. After a while, Wen Yuan's breathing became a little rapid, so he gave her a very warm smile. Do you want it again? Wen Yuan's answer was to get up and throw a pillow on his face. Behind him, there was a soft laugh. Wen Yuan snorted and pulled the bathroom door up to wash alone. If she continued to indulge him, she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. When she finished, she thought he was going to check on the kids, but he was already dressed. At this moment, he was half leaning against the headboard smoking. Wen Yuan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He walked over and asked, What's wrong? Isn't it enough? It had already been 3 times. She really didn't know why he was in the office every day. Didn't they say that men in their 40s couldn't take it anymore? Yimubai stared at her. With one hand, he hooked her fragrant body over and let her rest in his arms. He loved having her in his arms. When Yuan tilted his head, his fingers playing with the buttons on his shirt. He was really despicable. He had clearly done it a few times, but he didn't take off his clothes. He only stripped her clean, and now she was lying down properly with the zipper pulled up. There was a hint of bitterness in her eyes. Her little hand moved over and pinched him lightly. Yimubai lowered his head and laughed. You still dare to tease me? When Yuan bit his lip. Since you want it, what do you think about Sumo's matter? Yimubai let out a long sigh. Leave it to Kong Yuan. It's best if Suemo doesn't respond. Otherwise, we can just say that we're just ordinary friends. Anyway, we didn't get anything substantial. When Yuan nodded. That's true. Yimubai looked at her again. You're always worried about her. Mrs. Yi, don't you care too much about me? When Yuan's eyes widened. How am I not? She bit his Adam's apple. Didn't we do it 3 times just now? Chapter 40-33. CEO Yi glanced at her. I was the one who took the initiative just now. She felt like crying. CEO Yi unbuttoned his shirt and said happily. Moreover, the 50 million is guaranteed every year. Mrs. Yi, shouldn't you be the one to take the initiative? When Yuan was completely devoured, and in his heart, he was cursing Suemo like a pig's head. That night, CEO Yi was very satisfied. At H City's heart hospital, Suemo was lying alone. She was much better, but it was a little lonely lying in the hospital like this. The VIP ward was still a ward, and it couldn't change anything. She lay quietly for a while, took out her phone and scrolled through the news about herself. She and Kong Qiao. Then Kong Qiao's response was at the top of the search list. Hashtag Kong Qiao's response was just an ordinary friend. She clicked on it. Kong Qiao responded at the press conference that she was his mother's friend, and he was just taking care of her when she was sick. They didn't have the kind of relationship that everyone thought. Suemo chuckled. She thought that he was very smart. Actually, there was no relationship between them. They just slept together a few times. She put down her phone, which was beside her pillow. Then, she closed her eyes gently. On Sumo's side, the matter was over. But for some reason, Kong Qiao's fans dug out that the woman in the car with Kong Qiao before the new year was not the model, but Suemo. The fan named Listen to the Sea linked Suemo and the unknown woman in the car, as well as the model, and finally came to a conclusion. The woman in the car was Suemo. That night it was a hot search again. On Kong Qiao's side, Wang Yun looked at Kong Qiao and said in a low voice, It has been removed once again. If this Listen to the Sea continues to make trouble, things will really get out of hand. Anyway, we can't admit it. After all, we were talking about another girl. After so long, someone actually found out. Kong Qiao sat by the window and smoked quietly. If I said it was Suemo, what would the consequences be? Your reputation would be ruined. What would your fans think of you? You might even be listed as a band artist. Wang Yun's voice was firm. Kong Qiao chuckled softly and mumbled, A band artist. Am I not? Wang Yun looked like she had lost her temper. After a long time, she said in a low voice, In short, It's unlikely that you and Su Mo will be together. Kong Qiao, don't meet her again in the future. Your career is currently in transition, and reputation is too important to you. Kong Qiao continued to smoke. After a long time, she finally muttered, "Do you think everyone is willing to accept a notorious artist like me? Do you think anyone cares about my wealth?" After saying that, he laughed at himself. Wang Yin couldn't communicate with him anymore. She thought about it and finally said in a low voice, "Anyway, let's not contact each other anymore." Kong Qiao looked at Wang Yin and suddenly asked, "This friend Tinghai seems very interesting." Wang Yin stood at the door for a while, but Kong Qiao did not continue. Wang Yin left. Although the matter was a little big, it was only a vague comparison after all. The person involved did not respond, so it slowly sank. Chapter 4034. New Wife Number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Latest chapter. This year was undoubtedly Kong Qiao's year. The other popular person in the entertainment industry was Bai Jingxian, who also belonged to King Entertainment. However, Bai Jingxian was poached by Yi Mubai in the same year. The good thing was that he could go to Mr. Wen's class. Because of this, when Yuan didn't talk to CEO Yi for a week, Yi Mubai took a long time to coax him. However, the little puppy who used to be his love rival was now CEO Ye's favorite pet. No, he was his favorite general. CEO Yi thought highly of him and brought Bai Jingxian everywhere. When Yuan even thought that Bai Jingxian was Mrs. Yi. However, she knew the darkness in Yi Mubai's heart too well. He thought that Bai Jingxian wouldn't be able to hook up with her and put his love rival by her side. But now, when Yuan thought that Bai Jingxian was her love rival, what should she do? That was what she said when she was drinking tea with Su Mo. Su Mo was stunned, and then she laughed to death. After more than a month, she had put on some weight. Although she remembered a lot from time to time, she was in a much better mood now. Su Mo held her chin and looked at Wen Yuan. What about your relationship with Bai Jingxian? Wen Yuan rolled his eyes. He calls me Mr. Wen. But sometimes when he comes to my house, he calls me Yi Mubai. Mubai. Su Mo slapped the table and laughed again. She looked at Wen Yuan and said, "Are you inviting a wolf into the house?" "Probably." Wen Yuan held the cup and took a sip of tea. "When I come home one day, I won't be surprised to see them lying on the bed." Su Mo smiled brightly. "Do you have to be so pessimistic? Or are you seducing them? It's definitely more comfortable to do it with women than with men, right?" Wen Yuan's expression was a little strange. "I think they're on the rise. Mubai might not be on the top." Su Mo was stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. "Was that right?" Wen Yuan looked at her and changed the topic. "How's the preparation for next week's charity banquet?" Su Mo nodded. "It's going well. This time, CEO Yi really helped, so the venue should be fine." This was the first charity banquet organized by Love. Originally, Su Mo's qualifications were completely insufficient, but there was someone behind him. Even if CEO Ye's weight wasn't enough, there was still General Nocturnal behind him. General Nocturnal would come that night, so who would dare to not support his work? This was the first time that Su Mo had tasted the feeling of suppressing someone with his power, and it felt really good. When Yuan smiled. "That's good. Prepare well. If you need my help, just let me know." Su Mo also smiled. "I won't be polite." In fact, Wen Yuan had really helped her a lot. She knew in her heart that Wen Yuan had long passed the stage of returning favors. Wen Yuan really treated her as family, so he indulged her to be a good person. However, now she was no longer a goody two-shoes. They were also on a larger scale. Although it was a headache, and there were many things to do, everything was meaningful. Wen Yuan parted ways with her and went straight home. Yi Mubai was at home. Xiangnan and Yi Hui were also there. School ended at 5 o'clock. Bai Jingxian was there as well. The four of them sat on the sofa, looking quite harmonious like a family. Wen Yuan didn't know why, but he felt that way. He walked over and said to Bai Jingxian, "You're here?" Xiao Bai didn't feel uncomfortable at all. "I'm here to freeload. Teacher Wen, you don't mind, right?" Wen Yuan chuckled. "I don't mind. I'll go up and change before coming down." Bai Jingxian smiled. Wen Yuan immediately went upstairs. Chapter 40-35. When she was changing her clothes, when Yuan felt like fucking a dog, she thought about the guests downstairs and changed out of her outdoor clothes into a casual set of home clothes. Well, that's right. Bai Jingxian is like a member of this family now, so there's no need to treat him as an outsider. When Yuan thought so, in the mirror, a second person appeared. She glared at him. Yi Mubai hugged her from behind and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Are you angry? Because I brought Jingxian home." When Yuan looked at his husband in the mirror and grunted, he turned around and gently grabbed the collar of his shirt. "I'll probably be angry when he's in your bed." He grabbed her and walked a few steps forward, forcing Wen Yuan to stand in front of the mirror and pressing against her. Wen Yuan bit her lips. "Yi Mubai." He lowered his head and gently pecked her lips. His voice was hoarse. "I heard that the best way to deal with a rival in love is to make him your wife's rival in love. It seems to be very effective." As he said that, his thin lips moved to her ear. His voice was even more hoarse. "Wen Yuan, are you jealous?" "No." She was annoyed. "He's getting more and more perverted." "Well, if he's a pervert, let him watch us do it." "That's perverted," Xiao Yi said shamelessly. Wen Yuan glared at him, and he chuckled. His body was still pressed against her. He nibbled her neck for a while and suddenly said, "I want to do." Wen Yuan was speechless and pushed him. "It's dinner time, and your mistress is still downstairs." He laughed. "Why is he my mistress? Isn't he your good student?" "Mr. Wen, you were too cold just now." Bai Jingxuan's heart was hurt. Wen Yuan was speechless. He did it on purpose. He was too evil. Although she was angry, she really couldn't do anything about him. She turned her head away angrily. "Don't bring him home in the future." "Angry?" He laughed. He succeeded in making love to her in the changing room. At first, Wen Yuan was a little absent-minded. After all, not every woman could keep up with her husband's passion. She bit her nails and endured his excessive energy, but he didn't allow her to be in a daze. Later she became a little crazy. When Yuan couldn't stand it anymore, she grabbed his black hair. "Mubai, be gentle." He took his time and kissed her lips. "How can I satisfy Mrs. Yi? Didn't you complain that I brought a mistress home? Now I'm trying my best to show that I love Mrs. Yi the most." When Yuan couldn't make a sound anymore, she could only hug him. Half an hour later, Yi Mubai kissed her neck with satisfaction. His fingers skillfully tidied up her clothes. "Shall we go downstairs for dinner?" When Yuan glared, she pushed him away and walked in front. He sniffed at her from behind, thinking that it seemed like she hadn't had enough. Walking was still normal. He followed behind her. When Yuan had learned ballet when she was young, so she walked gracefully. Fortunately, she had not learned it for a long time, so her feet were still very beautiful. Yi Mubai followed her to the dining room. The two children, and Bai Jingxian had already sat down. Xiangnan and Yi Hui liked Bai Jingxian very much, because this was an era where looks mattered. Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan sat down. Bai Jingxian said playfully, "Mr. Wen, you took a long time to change." Yi Hui muttered, "It's not long. It used to take a few hours. The food is already cold." Chapter 40-36. Wen Yuan. Yi Mubai. "That's because your papa has good kidneys." Xiangnan. "There are some things that can't be said, sister." Bai Jingxian looked at Yi Mubai with a faint smile, and Yi Mubai asked with a smile, "Are you unhappy?" Bai Jingxian still had a faint smile on his face. "A little bit." Wen Yuan felt that her worldview was going to explode. She looked at Bai Jingxian, and he also looked at her with a smile. Wen Yuan didn't like the meal. After the meal, Yi Mubai was satisfied and went to help the two kids with their homework. Wen Yuan sat in the living room and played the piano, while Bai Jingxian listened. After playing more than 10 songs, Wen Yuan looked at Bai Jingxian and asked, "What's your purpose?" Bai Jingxian smiled and said, "Mr. Wen, I'm an artist under stars now, and flattering the boss is my job, isn't it?" Wen Yuan glared at him and said, "When did you become so glib?" Bai Jingxian continued to smile and said, "Mr. Wen, why didn't you think that I actually wanted to win both of you?" Wen Yuan was stunned for a moment. Then he couldn't control himself anymore. He picked up the music score in front of him and threw it at him. Bai Jingxian was hit, but he wasn't angry. He picked it up and said, I was kidding. At this time, Yimubai came downstairs. Seeing Wen Yuan's angry face, he looked at Bai Jingxian and asked, What's wrong? Bai Jingxian touched his chin and chuckled. Mr. Wen is angry. President Yi, please comfort him. I'll leave first. He was finally angry. He had thought that Wen Yuan could bear it for a long time. But it turned out that he liked her so much that he rejected the same sex. He loved her deeply, so he blamed her deeply. He got up and was about to leave, but Yimubai stopped him and said, Jingxian, I have something to tell you. Then he looked at his wife and said with a smile, Wen Yuan, Jingxian and I are going to the study to talk about something. You go take a shower first. Didn't you say that it was sticky and uncomfortable? Bai Jingxian felt that President Yi really didn't care about his feelings as a single dog. He even used the word sticky. He sighed and went to the study. CEO Yi walked to his wife, bent down and kissed her. Are you happy? Happy about what? She was still angry. CEO Ye's voice was particularly hoarse. I'm very happy that my love rival has become your love rival. As he spoke, he chuckled and went upstairs. Wen Yuan's piano playing was indescribable. After about half an hour, Bai Jingxian came down and said goodbye to her. Wen Yuan actually felt a little emotional and sat there, ignoring him. Bai Jingxian lowered his eyes to hide the disappointment in them. In fact, he didn't change. It could only mean that CEO Ye's methods were good. It could only mean that in her heart, there was only Yimubai and no one else. Bai Jingxian smiled and left. Yimubai also came downstairs and looked at Wen Yuan. Angry again. She's just an artist from Stars Entertainment, and she's a high-ranking artist. How can I not coax her? CEO Yi was very good at psychological warfare. She vented all her previous anger and said softly, What's more, she's only 24 years old, very young. She needs more coaxing. Don't you think so, Mrs. Yi? Wen Yuan gritted her teeth and felt that he was too hateful. CEO Yi picked her up and said unhurriedly, Well, why are you angry with a child? I can't do anything with him, can I? By saying that, he meant that he was going to do something with her. What happened before was just an appetizer. Chapter 4037. Wen Yuan was speechless and stared at him. I don't want to do it. He carried her to the study, put her on the sofa, and pressed her shoulder. If you don't want to do it, let's look at something else first. As he said this, he gave her a copy. Wen Yuan glanced at it and was stunned. It turned out to be the endorsement of love. The endorser was Bai Jingxian. Wen Yuan was stunned. You talked about this in the study? Well, what do you think I will talk to him about? Romance or holding him in my arms like this? He reached out and pulled Wen Yuan into his arms, lowering his head to take a bite. Wen Yuan was still holding the contract in her hand. She saw that Bai Jingxian was free of the endorsement fee. She was stunned again. Yimubai smiled. I'll make up for this part. Don't think that this little bastard doesn't want money. Wen Yuan didn't know what to say. She felt a little warm in her heart. She knew that he was not such a kind-hearted person. He was willing to help Su Mo like this because of her. She bit her lower lip, put down the contract, and put her arms around his neck. Will this new endorser always come to our house in the future? If you like, I can ask him to accompany the children. President Yi kissed the tip of her nose. After all, Xiangnan and Yi Hui both like him, and Bai Jingxian is a good person. This was what President Yi was very unwilling to admit, but he had to admit it. He kissed and rubbed her on the sofa leisurely. He felt that it was not enough, so he put his coat on her shoulders and carried her back to the master bedroom to love her completely. Because of excessive indulgence, not only did Wen Yuan sleep late, but also Yimubai got up after 10 o'clock. He knew that Wen Yuan had no classes this afternoon, so he kissed her forehead. I'll ask the driver to pick up the children tonight. Let's go out for dinner tonight, okay? Wen Yuan nodded. After being kissed several times on the forehead by him, she was a little shy and turned her face away. Yimubai smiled and reached out to rub her hair. I'm going to the company. Wen Yuan bit her lip and didn't say anything. He smiled again and leaned over to kiss her lips. He murmured, I've seen everything last night. Why are you still shy? Stop talking. Wen Yuan wrapped his arms around his neck and buried his face in it. He chuckled, patted her and left. Wen Yuan slept for a while before he got up. He called Suemo and told her about Bai Jingxian being their spokesperson. It had to be known that the home of love was not famous, and the people in the entertainment industry were not willing to do it. Even if they were offered money, they might not be willing. After all, popularity could not bring any substantial benefits. However, things would be different if Bai Jingxian joined them. His image was very good, and his recent film had even been nominated for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film. Speaking of this, Wen Yuan thought of Lu Man. Lu Man's film won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film, but Lu Man herself did not win the Female Lead Award. Because of this, Lu Man was quite upset. Wen Yuan had seen the film before. Putting aside her personal grudges, Wen Yuan felt that Lu Man had used too much force. Moreover, the entire film had only shown a superficial image. She really didn't understand why the judges had given her an award. Of course, she didn't say this to Yi Mubai. As for Lu Man, she had not seen her for half a year. She heard that she had returned to America. Wen Yuan hadn't seen Lu Man for a long time. She didn't expect to see her so soon. There's more. Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan won't torture each other anymore. Be jealous. Chapter 4038. At 5 o'clock, she got into the driver's car and went to Stars Entertainment. The receptionist knew CEO Ye's wife and led her to the elevator with a smile. CEO Yi has a meeting today, but it should be over by now. Secretary He is upstairs. Wen Yuan smiled, and the receptionist felt warm in her heart. Everyone in Stars Entertainment liked Wen Yuan, because he didn't put on airs, and was very kind. Moreover, CEO Yi didn't have any scandals in the company. A loving couple always had a lot of fans. Wen Yuan went up. Yi Mubai was in a meeting, and he now greeted her with fruit tea and snacks. She said softly, "It's an internal meeting, but Lu Man might join Stars Entertainment." Wen Yuan almost spilled the tea in his hand. He looked at Hina. "Is it Mubai's idea or Lu Man's?" Hina lowered her voice. "It's CEO Ye's idea. On one hand, Lu Man's contract with the US company has arrived. On the other hand, Stars Entertainment needs such an actress. CEO Yi has been competing with King Entertainment. If Lu Man doesn't sign with Stars Entertainment, CEO Yi will probably sign with King Entertainment." Scarlett frowned. "I haven't heard him say that." Hina sighed. "I can guarantee that CEO Yi has no romantic feelings for Miss Lu. Wen Yuan, can you trust me this time?" Wen Yuan didn't say anything. At this time, Yi Mubai pushed the door open and came in with someone behind him. It was Bai Jingxian. Bai Jingxian retorted in a very firm voice, "I will never have a scandal with Lu Man." He finally understood why this black-hearted boss had poached him at such a high price. He wanted to take the blame for him. There were so many actresses in the company, but Lu Man? Yi Mubai also saw Wen Yuan. She paused but still turned around. "Why not?" Bai Jingxian said straightforwardly. "Because she is too old." Wen Yuan was still tense, but Secretary He couldn't help but laugh. He looked at Wen Yuan and said, "What an honest boy. Lu Man has never been despised like this before." Wen Yuan glanced at her with a smile in his eyes. Yi Mubai squinted at Bai Jingxian. "It's the company's arrangement." Bai Jingxian immediately sat down on the sofa armrest beside Wen Yuan and coughed. "Then I'll post on Weibo right away and say that I like CEO Yi and his wife." "Brat, do you want to die?" Yi Mubai patted him on the back. "I'm asking you to flirt with her. It's not like you're really dating or sleeping with her. Why are you in such a hurry?" Bai Jingxian stroked his chin with his beautiful fingers. "I told you she's too old." What a black-hearted boss. To think that sometimes he really thought that he was CEO Ye's sweetheart. Really, the one who was asleep was the sweetheart. Only now did Bai Jingxian realize that he had been fooled. He curled his fingers. "I request a substitution." Wen Yuan also looked at him. "Little Bai, who do you want?" "Suemo." Bai Jingxian smiled wickedly. Although Suemo is as old as she is, he's much more interesting. Yi Mubai was speechless. Suemo was quite interesting. He could provoke Kong Qiao, right? He looked at Wen Yuan. "You've really messed with a treasure boy." Wen Yuan pretended to be dead. He hadn't explained to her about Lu Man yet. Yi Mubai agreed. Okay, Suemo. I'll arrange for Suemo to participate in the reality show with you. Of course, there was also Lu Man and Kong Chiao. These people could be used to make a scene. And CEO Yi had really disliked Kong Chiao for a long time. Chapter 4039. After Bai Jingxian left, Yi Mubai sat next to Wen Yuan and rubbed her hand. Are you angry? Wen Yuan looked at him and asked softly. What do you think? She paused. Yi Mubai, do you think I'm a pushover that you can bully at will? Yes, you did it for Stars Entertainment, but where do you think I am? Her principle couldn't be changed just because secretary, he said there was no ambiguity. Yi Mubai frowned. I'm just an artist under the company. I don't want to meet her. When Yuan didn't say anything, she took her bag and walked out. I don't want to quarrel with you. Do as you see fit. Yi Mubai stopped her. When Yuan? She didn't turn around. I'm not eating. After she walked out, secretary he looked at Yi Mubai. He was a little embarrassed. CEO Yi, aren't you going to chase after her? Yi Mubai looked at her and said calmly. Is it useful to chase after her? Lu Man would definitely absorb Stars Entertainment. When Yuan was angry, so he could coax her slowly. But he didn't expect that when Yuan didn't go home that night, she went to drink with Bai Xueli. Although Bai Xueli was the sister-in-law, she was completely tamed like a little puppy, since she got together with the boss of the Yi family. She looked at Wen Yuan. Little Bai won't. That Lu Man is a thing of the past. You don't know how fierce the competition in the entertainment industry is. Yes, it's fierce. Wen Yuan murmured. What if Lu Man comes to my house? Her voice became softer. Xueli, I have a feeling that Lu Man is ambitious. Bai Xueli didn't know what to say. Wen Yuan seemed to be guarding against her. But as a woman she couldn't bear it. She was like this to the female lawyer in the past. Anyway, she couldn't bear it. She whispered, then what should we do? When Yuan was a little drunk, and her eyebrows were a little flirtatious, she brushed her hair aside. I'll move out. Little Bai was stunned. When Yuan did what he said, he didn't go back that night, but booked a presidential suite in the Four Seasons Hotel. Moreover, he booked it for a whole week. The room fee was 58,000 yuan per night. Thinking about it, he felt sorry for CEO Yi. Late at night, when Yuan lay alone in the hotel suite, she drank a little too much. In the end, it was Bai Xueli who asked Yi Mulan to send her back to the hotel. Her phone was turned off, and she didn't want to care about it, so she just slept. She was a little tired. All these years, because of Xiangnan's health, and because she had given birth to Yi Hui, she had not had a good rest. This time, she let go of everything, and let him do whatever he wanted. On the other side, Yi Mulan was driving, and Bai Xueli was sitting next to him. Riceworm asked her man uneasily, will it be bad if we really leave Wen Yuan in the hotel? There are bad guys in the hotel? Yi Mulan smiled. I've called Mubai. He knows that Wen Yuan is there and will go. Will it be inconvenient for you to be there? Bai Xueli leaned over. What's inconvenient? Mr. Yi glances at her while driving. I'm driving, she said. Oh, and sat down. He continued to drive. About half an hour later, he reached home and carried her out of the car. Bai Xueli pursed her lips. And will laugh if she sees it. She's asleep. Yi Mulan carried his little wife into the elevator, lowered his head and kissed her lips. He murmured, she's sleeping with Auntie tonight. Riceworm blushed. Her face was very hot. She bit her lips and hooked her arms around his neck. You're so bad. End of this chapter. Chapter 4040. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling you. Latest chapter. I've been abroad for a week. Don't you miss me? He bit the tip of her nose. You heartless little thing. He opened the door and gently carried her to the master bedroom and put her on the soft bed. He bent down and supported his body with his hands. He kissed her and murmured, shower or do it first? In fact, she also wanted it when he wasn't at home for a week. She took the initiative to hug his waist. Do it first. Yi Mulan smiled, covered her body and kissed her fiercely, indulging himself in the sea of desire. After a few times, she stared at him with her eyes wide open. Yi Mulan. He laughed. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? It wasn't at all. He said he would do it 3 times in a row. He was really inhuman. I've been hungry for too long, Mrs. Yi. He still couldn't bear to leave. He nibbled on her soft lips. Get up and take a bath. Didn't you say you bought new bath salts last time? His little worm looked at him with a gaze that made people's hair stand on end. He would definitely come up with other bad ideas. He was too bad. Yi Muling carried her to the bathroom. His voice was hoarse. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Why aren't you used to it? That night the worm cried bitterly. Used to it? She would never get used to this kind of high-intensity exercise. The nocturnal chieftain, who was reported to be cold and abstinent, was simply a pervert. Sob sob. Let him go abroad every day and never come back. It was bustling here. But Yi Mubai sat alone in the villa. It was a little gloomy. He looked at his phone. He had called Wen Yuan more than 10 times, but her phone was turned off. He knew where she was, that she was asleep, and that she was going to live outside. She left without even having a child. Was Lu Man really that important? He never thought that Lu Man would affect his life. In fact, as Wen Yuan thought, Lu Man would not affect the future of Stars Entertainment. He signed Lu Man just to build momentum and compete for resources. Stars Entertainment and King Entertainment were competing fiercely. He didn't want Lu Man to be a watershed. He didn't expect Wen Yuan to run away from home, because he didn't agree. He sat there for most of the night, and finally went out at dawn. Before he left, he settled Xiangnan and Yi Hui down. Last night, the 2 little fellows had asked him why his mother hadn't come back, and he had said that his mother had gone out to play. Yi Mubai drives all the way to the Four Seasons Hotel. When the car stops, he feels a little funny and angry at the same time. Every time she runs away from home, does she only come to this hotel? He got out of the car and walked to the front desk. The receptionist recognized him as soon as she came down. Hello, CO Yi. Are you looking for someone or a room? Yi Mubai knocked on the door gently. My wife lives here. I'm looking for her. Her name is Wen Yuan. The receptionist froze for a moment before she realized that the best actor was also a mortal. The couple had even quarreled, and his wife had run out. The lady at the front desk checked and smiled. You are a guest of the presidential suite. Do you want to go up by yourself? Or do we need to open another room card? Get another room card, he said, because Wen Yuan might not open the door for him, and he didn't want to wake her up. The receptionist immediately gave him the card. Yi Mubai nodded, and went straight into the elevator to the presidential suite on the top floor. He swiped the card and opened the door. The room was dark, and only the light in the bathroom was on. There was a faint smell of alcohol in the air. He frowned. Did she sleep without washing last night? Chapter 40-41. After walking through the living room, he got his answer. Wen Yuan was lying on the soft bed with her face buried in the pillow. She was sound asleep. He sighed and sat down. He reached out and pushed her hair aside. Even her breath was a little tipsy. How much did she drink last night to be like this? He ran his fingers through her black hair, not wanting to wake her up. But Wen Yuan still woke up. She blinked and realized that she was lying in an unfamiliar environment. It should be a hotel. And the man beside her. She looked up into Yi Mubai's eyes. He said indifferently, Are you going to run away from home again because of this? Wen Yuan, you're not a child anymore. There's no right or wrong in the world of adults. The past isn't that important. What's important is the future. His voice was hoarse, and his tone became affectionate. She and I are in the past, and I've never really liked her, let alone care about her now. Wen Yuan listened, buried her face in the pillow, and said after a long time, Do you care about me? If you care about me, you won't consider bringing Lu Man into Stars Entertainment. You asked her to be the lead actress more than a year ago, and you asked her to come to Stars Entertainment a year later. Yi Mubai, I know you don't care about her, but you definitely don't care about me enough. Our ideals are completely different. You said that you don't want me to show my face in public, so I stay at home. I teach to innocent children. I don't take on commercial performances, and I don't think about fame and fortune, because these are the sacrifices I'm willing to make for my family as a woman. His gaze was cold. Wen Yuan, do you think this is a sacrifice? Isn't it? She sat up, her head still aching. and the makeup on her face was a bit messy. But she didn't care about that. She only felt disappointed. Did he ever consider her feelings as his wife when he was expanding his career? Wen Yuan didn't know, and she didn't want to know. She just wanted to calm down. I'll move out, and we should think about whether we should continue our marriage, she said. Yi Mubai was stunned, and after a long time he murmured, You want to live apart? She said, I'll look for a house, Yi Mubai. If Lu Man enters Stars Entertainment, then marriage will be a matter of patience. I don't want to be patient all the time. Endure it. Yi Mubai didn't get angry. Instead he laughed. Wen Yuan, in your heart, am I a bastard who can't tell a woman apart? He stood up and said, You know, running a company doesn't have to consider your feelings, but the overall situation. Wen Yuan raised his head. So you and I are not suitable for each other. He stared at her in shock. After glaring at her for a long time, he smiled bitterly. Wen Yuan, you have no conscience. You know how I treat you. We can discuss the best result for Lu Man. But don't you think it's too much to live separately? What else? Divorce? Wen Yuan said calmly. He stared at her as if he didn't recognize her. After a long time he said bitterly, Wen Yuan, what does marriage mean to you? It is very sacred. She looked at him. It is what I value the most, but you have repeatedly crossed the bottom line. Yi Mubai, it's not that I can't tolerate Lu Man, but you've never given me a sense of security. If you also think we're not suitable, then let's divorce. She said it so easily. End of this chapter. Hurry up and read the latest update. Chapter 40-42. Yi Mubai looked at her and was furious. He said coldly, Up to you. As soon as he said that, the air froze. Wen Yuan said after a long time, Okay. She said, Boss, you should be very busy. I'll take care of the children. Yi Mubai stared at her and said in the coldest voice in his life, You have legs and you want to leave, but Xiangnan and Yi Hui are my children. I won't give them to you, not even one. If you are not satisfied, find a lawyer and go to court. He looked like there was no room for negotiation. He was really angry with her. They had their differences, but it was not to the point of divorce. Yi Mubai got up and left without saying anything. Maybe he really needed to calm down, or he would strangle her to death. Wen Yuan quietly leaned against the headboard and lowered his eyes to listen to the sound of the door closing. She didn't regret saying it. Lu Man joining Stars Entertainment was the last straw, and her bottom line. Wen Yuan couldn't stand a woman he had slept with in the company. His reaction also told her that they really didn't see eye to eye. Maybe he had been in the entertainment industry for a long time and didn't care about it. But she cared. In the afternoon, Bai Shueli came over and had afternoon tea with Wen Yuan in the hotel. She said in a low voice, Wen Yuan, did you really say it? Please don't. Think about it. When you were not here, that woman took advantage of it. Wen Yuan pursed his lips and said in a low voice, But I really can't stand it. Shueli, do you know that when Lu Man was filming that movie, they were talking and Lu Man suddenly said in French, Does Mrs. Mubai know that we have slept together? Do you know that I felt as uncomfortable as if I had eaten a fly? And now that the fly has flown back, I can't stand it anymore. Bai Shueli was still like a little lamb. You can talk to Lao Bai. He knows that I know French. Wen Yuan smiled bitterly. He pretended that it didn't happen. Maybe Lu Man is not important in his life, but she is important in mine. I know it's a fly. Bai Shueli sipped her milk tea and said, Little Bai is too outrageous. Why don't I get Yi Mulan to teach him a lesson? Wen Yuan shook his head. This is a problem between us. But they can't go to the step of divorce. Bai Shueli shouted. That Lu Man is too shameless. She's already so old, yet she still seduces men. If I really liked her, I would have married her long ago. Lu Man just smiled. Yi Mubai would never understand that Lu Man was a disgusting existence to her. And even if he understood, he would probably sacrifice her feelings, because he probably thought that she would never be able to leave him. Because he had 2 children, he said that he couldn't take any of them away. Therefore, even if she made a fuss, it would only be a small fuss. The child was in his hands. Wen Yuan looked at the time. It's getting late. I still have to go to school. No, Wen Yuan. Do you still have to go to class? Bai Shuili asked anxiously. When Yuanji smiled faintly. What else can I do? Wallow in self-pity in the hotel? She smiled faintly. Shuili, don't worry about me. What's mine is still mine. It's not a pity to lose what doesn't belong to me. Between her and Yi Mubai, there was a conflict about Lu Man in the past. However, because Lu Man went back to the United States, it was put aside. When Lu Man came back, it was just that she didn't have the courage. End of this chapter. Chapter 40-43. When Yuan went to class as usual. Unexpectedly, she saw Bai Jingxian in the big class. After class he didn't leave. Even when all the students had left, he was still looking at Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan walked over slowly and sat down beside Bai Jingxian. She tilted her head. You know? He nodded, then flipped his hair and said, Divorce, marry me. Wen Yuan laughed. Don't you think I'm old? I think I'm almost 35. When she was with Yi Mubai, she wasn't a little girl anymore. However, she had really liked Yi Mubai for many years, and she still liked him. It was just that their views on the world, and even their views on marriage were different. She didn't plan to indulge him. Bai Jingxian looked at her with a faint smile. Some people have special privileges. He patted the table and stood up. Let's go, I'll treat you to a meal. Life needs a sense of ceremony. Miss Wen, you're being pursued by a man 10 years younger than you. Please don't feel disappointed about losing your marriage, okay? In my heart, Mr. Wen is always a high-spirited 25-year-old. He was good at coaxing people. Wen Yuan picked up her things and walked out with him. Actually, there had been rumors about them before. However, Bai Jingxian didn't care at all. He walked out with her on the cotton road of B Academy. However, the conversation stung her eyes. Wen Yuan said briskly as they walked, Bai Jingxian compared to Lu Man, I'd rather you and Yi Mubai be together. Bai Jingxian gave her an unbearable look. Please, I don't want a man to that, you know. Wen Yuan laughed. She actually thought that Bai Jingxian was a rival in love for a short period of time. It was probably because she cared too much that she fell into Yi Mubai's trap. It was better not to care too much. In the past she made a fuss, so he and Lu Man were estranged. Now, he actually wanted to pull Lu Man into Star's entertainment. He really thought that she couldn't leave. In the end, they got into Bai Jingshuan's car. He even went to pick up Xiangnan and Yi Hui. He also called the driver to tell him not to pick up. The driver knew that CEO Ye's house was noisy, so he called Yi Mubai. Yi Mubai was in a meeting. After hanging up the phone, his face was so gloomy, as if his wife had been caught in the act. After a moment, he pursed his lips and said to the people below, Meeting adjourned. When he walked out, he couldn't wait to call Bai Jingxian. Where are you? Bai Jingxian was driving when he received CEO Ye's call. He turned his head and looked at Wen Yuan. I'm with teacher 1 and 2 kids. We're going to have a candlelit dinner later. Don't worry, CEO Yi. I'll take good care of them. Yi Mubai simply wanted to curse. Rest assured my ass. Is there anyone with the surname Bai who takes care of people like this? Bai Jingxian said with a smile. By the way, I forgot to tell you that I don't want to be a couple with Su Mo anymore. If the company does this, I won't cooperate. My heart belongs to someone else. Yi Mubai almost exploded in anger after half a beating and half a beating. Throwing the phone on the table, he now looked at their wise CEO Ye's face, and knew that in the entire company, only Bai Jingxian could anger him. Sigh, there was nothing she could do. She spoiled him, so she had to spoil him even if he knelt down. On the other side, Bai Jingxian put away his phone and looked at Wen Yuan with a smile. How was my performance? Wen Yuan smiled faintly. Chapter 40-44. Bai Jingxian kept driving. After a while he suddenly said, Don't worry. I'm here. Lu Man can't be the most popular girl in Star's entertainment. Wen Yuan was surprised. Bai Jingxian stopped at the intersection in front of them. He held his chin with one hand and tapped the steering wheel with the other. Then he smiled. Because I'm the most popular girl in Star's entertainment, and CEO Ye's little cutie. They all belong to me. Although Wen Yuan knew he was joking, she still felt her jaw drop. Xiao Bai really had no morals at all. But other than complaining, She felt a little warm inside. Xiaobai was really good. So good that he was like Yi Mubai back then, a younger version of Mubai. When Yuan thought that if she were 10 years younger, if she had met Bai Jingxian first, she might have fallen in love with him. The two kids in the back looked at the adults. Bai Jingxian kept driving and coughed. Xiangnan Yehui, you can call me uncle and mom from now on. Oh. The two kids agreed. When Yuan was speechless, Bai Jingxian gave her a proud look. I told you I'm the most popular girl in Stars Entertainment. When he stopped the car, he unfastened the seatbelt and looked at Wen Yuan seriously. Go out and have fun. The two kids are taken care of by their mom. Wen Yuan was speechless and touched. Finally, Bai Jingxian smiled again. I forgot to tell CEO Yi that we're going to be a couple. Wen Yuan's jaw dropped again. Xiaobai was very gentle and considerate towards her. He was especially nice to the two kids as well. Wen Yuan was dressed casually, and there was no difference in their ages. They looked like a family of 4. They made reservations for a candlelight dinner for the 4 of them, which the kids liked. Wen Yuan's mood also relaxed. It seemed that the matters between Yi Mubai and Lu Man were no longer important. She asked Bai Jingxian why he was like this. He thought for a moment and then said softly, I probably won't have enough time in this life. I'll let you be happy in your next life. Wen Yuan sighed with emotion. She cut the steak and said, I'm different from you. I have to get what I like. You're saying that you want me to take advantage of the situation? Teacher Wen, if you encourage me again, I might not be able to hold myself back. Bai Jingxian gently swirled his wine cup and said with a smile. Wen Yuan smiled. That's not what I meant. Jingxian, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that being liked like this is a very beautiful thing. Bai Jingxian put down his glass and said in a low voice. Actually, the reason why you guys dare to do this is because you think that CEO Yi can't bear to leave you. And CEO Yi also thinks that you can't leave him. Go ahead while you're still young. It was just that the third party, who wanted to take over, seemed a little overconfident and laughable. It wasn't that Bai Jingxian didn't have feelings for Wen Yuan, but he could feel that Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan loved each other. Throwing a tantrum now was probably a pleasure of a married couple. How could a married couple not quarrel? As soon as he finished speaking, a slender figure sat down beside him. Then a hoarse voice said, What are you talking about? Wen Yuan exclaimed and raised his head. The two children called him Daddy. Yi Hui came over cutely to let her daddy hug her. She pointed at Bai Jingxian, as if she was presenting a treasure. Uncle, you'll be our stepmother from now on. Yi Mubai's eyes were deep. Her gaze alternated between Wen Yuan and Bai Jingxuan's faces. Then she smiled gently. Wen Yuan, you're quite generous. Chapter 40-45. Wen Yuan pretended not to see it. In front of outsiders, Yi Mubai didn't mention family matters. Not to mention that his child was right in front of him. He waved his hand and asked the waiter to prepare a meal for him. They ate quietly and even fed Yi Hui. It was normal for a father to dote on his little daughter. Wen Yuan didn't say anything and took care of his son from time to time. His stepmother was left out. After Bai Jingxian finished eating, he tactfully said that he would leave first. After all, his stepmother was also an outsider, wasn't she? Yi Mubai looked at him deeply and said in a low voice, Come to my office tomorrow. Bai Jingxian stood up straight and held the armrest of his CEO Ye's chair. He said in a very soft voice, Do you want to wash up? Yi Mubai glared at him. Bai Jingxian smiled faintly and gracefully left. Yi Mubai retracted his gaze and looked at Wen Yuan. He didn't say anything. The family of 4 still ate together. With his children around, the atmosphere was good. He called the driver and asked him to send Xiangnan and Yi Hui back first. He would send Wen Yuan himself. Wen Yuan didn't refuse. After getting into the car, she looked in the direction of the car and said softly, I found an apartment. It wasn't the one Suemo found for me before. That apartment has been returned. Yi Mubai nodded. It sounds like you're still going to move out. Are you determined to cause trouble with me? Wen Yuan looked down. You also sound like you won't compromise. She turned to look at him. Are you really going to let Lu Man enter Stars Entertainment? He didn't say it out of anger. Instead, he softened his voice. Wen Yuan, I have no choice. Between your career and me, which is more important? She asked him softly. Yi Mubai held her hand. You're important. But Lu Man's existence won't affect us. He treated Lu Man like an artist. Even a few years ago, he didn't have that kind of feelings for her. It was just a one-night stand. Yi Mubai's voice was a little soft. Why don't you set up a probation period? If anything happens that you can't bear, I'll let you do whatever you want. He actually said the words, do as you wish, with a hint of ambiguity. Wen Yuan bit his lips and leaned against the back of the chair, not making a sound. He drove her to the hotel very gracefully. She wanted to go up by herself, but Yi Mubai insisted on sending her to the top floor. He sat there for a while, but he didn't break any rules. He looked like a couple about to separate. Wen Yuan poured him a glass of water and sat down. After a long time he said in a low voice, Yi Mubai, let's take 2 years. Let's calm down and think about it. Actually, it's not just about Lu Man. I want to be Wen Yuan again. Yi Mubai stared at her. Do you still think being Mrs. Yi is a burden? Or do you think that what Kong Qiao said was right, and that you also want to make a name for yourself? Wen Yuan shook his head. Leave it to fate. I just want to teach my books well. Where's the child? You don't want it anymore? His eyes were burning. Wen Yuan was stunned. I'll take them to my place on the weekends. I'll have to trouble you to take care of them. Bai Jingxian also said that he would take care of them. I trust him. You just don't trust me, do you? He quietly leaned over, held her chin, and said in a low voice, Wen Yuan, I'm your husband, not someone else's. Wen Yuan looked down and smiled. Then he said, you should know from the entertainment circle that the ending of a female star is usually to marry into a rich family, a big director, or the boss of a film company. You have all 3 identities. Do you think Lu Man will let go of a fat piece of meat that she has already taken a bite of? He frowned. This analogy is not good. I can't think of anything else for the time being. Wen Yuan said softly, Yi Mubai, the biggest problem in our marriage is not Lu Man, but your double standards. You have different standards for yourself and for me. If you can control yourself, I'm willing to be a housewife at home. But since my husband is not reliable, I have to plan for myself. Besides, I won't leave the family without anything. What should be mine is mine. If you use the child to hold me back, it's fine. You can take all of it with you. I'll be clean and I'll be able to find another home. Chapter 40-46. Housekeeper. She was going to do it with him. If he could threaten her with the 2 children, why couldn't she threaten him back? If he didn't want to give her the children, she could remarry. Yi Mubai's face was dark. It wasn't because of the money, but because she said she wanted to find someone else. He didn't understand. She had liked and loved him for so many years. How could she just leave him like that? Wen Yuan looked at him and smiled. If one day you don't care about me anymore, Yi Mubai, why should I continue to love you? It's not that I don't love you anymore. I just don't want to continue this love. Yi Mubai, I just want to tell you that I'm not just Mrs. Yi. My name is also Wen Yuan. I can remember how good you were to me, but that's not a reason for you to control me. She smiled. That's what you do in the entertainment industry. You pretend that nothing happened after you're done being friends, and you can still work with me after you get out of bed. I just want to tell you that I don't accept it. If you don't want to get a divorce, you can ask me for the separation period. It's the day Lu Man terminates her contract with Stars Entertainment. But I can't guarantee that I won't fall in love with someone else during that period. Yi Mubai let out a long breath and looked at her attentively. Are you serious? Yes, she said softly. Yi Mubai, I want to be willful for once. Even if you fail and your company collapses, I still have my hands and feet. I can live a luxurious life, but I can also live a simple life. His eyes were even more unfathomable. He knew that she wasn't being willful. She had thought it through. Separation. The future was really hard to predict. Yi Mubai leaned against the sofa and grabbed Wen Yuan over, pressing her on his shoulder. She didn't resist, and just lay on her stomach, burying her face in his shoulder. Yi Mubai's voice was a little hoarse. Wen Yuan, you can't bear to part with me, can you? She grunted and wrapped her arms around his neck. But Mubai, we really have a problem. It wasn't the first time. It had happened many times. But Lu Man's appearance ignited the fire. She was very honest with him. Maybe Lu Man's appearance is a very good thing. Otherwise, I will continue to live in a daze until one day, when I feel that I can't bear it anymore. That will be terrible. He took advantage of her faulty wording, and touched her nose with the tip of his nose. Can you bear it now? Why can't you? Wen Yuan put his arms around his neck and said softly, do you want me to continue to endure it? He kissed her on the forehead, on the tip of her nose, on her lips, and did not do anything else. After a long kiss he murmured, Wen Yuan, I can't bear to part with you. He suddenly realized that Wen Yuan had lost herself in this marriage. She was out of breath, and wanted to go out and relax. Yi, Wen Yi. He said that he couldn't bear to. Wen Yuan looked up. You agree? He smiled. I won't sign a contract with Lu Man. Move back home, Wen Yuan. You can do whatever you want in the future. Yi, t. She said yes. Later, she said that she wanted to stay outside for a while, which made Yi Mubai so angry that he slapped her on the butt. How pretentious. Do you really think I can't do anything to you? She lay in his arms and said, you said you couldn't bear to. Yi Mubai, leave me alone for a few days maybe? Her finger gently stroked his heart. What if I make it more delicious? The look in his eyes changed instantly. End of chapter. Chapter 40-47. Impatience. Even if they were separated, they still had to live as a couple. It was a great temptation for CEO Yi. Sometimes an old couple needed some stimulation. Yi Mubai turned over and pressed his wife on the sofa. Wen Yuan didn't resist. She wouldn't resist a man who was sincere. Yi Mubai's fingers gently touched her red lips, and his voice was terrifyingly low. Mrs. Yi, can't I satisfy your fantasy in bed? No. She bit her lips. Yi Mubai, don't you think we've never been in love? He smiled and unbuttoned her shirt with his fingers. You want to be in love with me? As he spoke, he lowered his head and bit her delicate neck. His voice was even hoarser. You want me to pursue you, don't you? He kissed her lower and lower. Wen Yuan grabbed his hair violently and pulled him back to his original position. Yi Mubai chuckled and whispered into her ear. Are you shy now that I've hit the nail on the head? No. Wen Yuan kicked him. Go back. Xiangnan and Yi Hui are still at home. He hadn't done it for a few days. He usually didn't do it for more than 3 days. If he left tonight, he wouldn't be a man. He begged for sex, but Wen Yuan didn't agree. She pushed against him. Yi Mubai, we're living separately. Really? Are you still living separately? He still got what he wanted. He bullied her again and again, which made Wen Yuan want to cry. He whipped her to his heart's content and murmured hoarsely, You can move out if you want, but I want sex for life. Wen Yuan bit her lips. How can a separated couple have sex? Then, he would tell her by example whether or not there was such a thing. Every week, you go back or I come over. You choose. Friday and Saturday, you have to spend the night together. Because his voice was influenced by Yuang, it was especially low and sexy. To Wen Yuan, it was also very tempting. She hugged his neck. Bossy. He chuckled. I'm almost willing to go bankrupt for you. I don't even have the right to live as a couple? Then I'd better get Lu Man into the company. Wen Yuan hugged her even tighter. Don't. Who's bossy, yeah? He chuckled and came against her again and again. This little bastard kept messing around with him. He hadn't touched her for a few days. He only let her off when the moon was in the middle of the sky. Wen Yuan felt as if he was about to be crushed by him. He felt as if he had been hollowed out both inside and out. In the last moment of tenderness, her fingers gently touched his sturdy waist and sighed. Your stamina is too good, isn't it? He kissed her. But Wen Yuan, you're still not satisfied. You still want to find something new. Weren't you satisfied just now? You're talking nonsense again. She closed her eyes and smiled. Without any conscience, she said, It's late. You should go home. He kissed her and said in a husky voice, Didn't you find a stepmother for the child? A stepmother is used to take care of the children, and a wife is used to warm the bed. Wen Yuan said, Why are you as shameless as Bai Jingxian? Yi Mubai smiled and finally let her go. He sat on the sofa and lit a cigarette. He didn't even tidy up his clothes. He let his belt and the buttons on his shirt loosen. He turned to look at her and smiled. Actually, he's quite good. Wen Yuan, it's good that you didn't choose him, even though he's 10 years younger than you. Wen Yuan was a little stunned. She didn't know why he was saying this. End of this chapter. Chapter 40-48. Impatience. Even if they're separated, they still have to live as husband and wife too. However, he pinched the cigarette in his hand and put her on his shoulder. His voice was soft but clear. Bai Jingxian is telling me today that if I don't spoil you, he'll take action. He wouldn't care about anyone else, but he was afraid of a man who was as good as the young Yi Mubai. He and Bai Jingxian had never been a good superior and subordinate. They were vampires and older vampires, and they were love rivals. Of course, it wasn't a relationship between a man and a stepmother. What they had in common was that they both loved Wen Yuan. While he was hostile, he also admired Bai Jingxian. He was willing to tell Wen Yuan all this, because he could tell that her choice was still him. Not bad. She was willing to fight with him, quarrel with him, and separate from him. She still cared about him. If she didn't care about her one day, she wouldn't care if Lu Man and Li Man entered the company. She would only care about being Mrs. Yi and counting money. As long as the children were in her position, everything would be fine. His heart suddenly softened. Wen Yuan was still the same person as before. She was willful, but she didn't want their marriage to go that far. She didn't want to become that kind of woman. He suddenly felt that he wasn't good enough, and that he had let her down. Even the love just now seemed too shallow. Of course, this kind of thinking was only for a moment. He would soon stop thinking like this. A life without a husband and wife was not a complete life. Yi Mubai's voice was gentle. Wen Yuan, I'll stay with you, okay? I'll help you move tomorrow. I'm worried about you being alone, so I have to take care of everything myself. Wen Yuan looked at him, not understanding why he had changed so much. It doesn't seem right to live apart like this. His voice became gentler. I just want to treat you better and dote on you more. Wen Yuan. Yeah, that seemed like a good thing. But it didn't seem like such a good thing. Had she given Lu Man a chance? However, CEO Yi kept his word. He would stay the night and take care of her. He had to go to the company early in the morning, so he told Wen Yuan to come home after class, and he would help her pack her things. Wen Yuan felt even more strange wrapped in the blanket. He nibbled her and said, "Why don't we not move?" He didn't want to be a weekend couple with her either. It would be best if she could understand. But Wen Yuan blinked. I still want to be single for the time being. Yi Mubai pinched her face and said in a hoarse voice, "You heartless little thing." He left. Then came the storm. An hour later, Lu Man looked at Yi Mubai in surprise and shock in Stars Entertainment's office. How is that possible? He didn't want to sign a contract with her. What does he know? She was an international celebrity, one of the best actresses in the country. She had more than 30 endorsements to her name. Was he crazy? She could have gone to King Entertainment. Her conditions were no worse than here. She did it for him. Lu Man's pride hadn't recovered yet. She looked at him, still unable to accept it. Yi Mubai's voice was a little faint. Lu Man, I will compensate you for this period of time. Compensate? Lu Man shook her head. You can't compensate me. Yi Mubai was a little displeased. Miss Lu, I don't owe you anything. The contract negotiation between you and Stars Entertainment is a normal process. Both parties can go back on their words. I'm just evaluating it now, and I don't think it's suitable. The compensation is also a favor. If you don't need it, I'm not willing to be the god of wealth. End of this chapter. Chapter 40-49. Impatience. Husband and wife, even separated, Lu Man's expression was ugly. She had never thought that she would be rejected. She was the triple flower queen, the most beautiful woman in the industry. He had actually given it to someone else. Lu Man wasn't satisfied. She gritted her teeth and squeezed out. It's because of Wen Yuan, isn't it? CEO Yi, you let your personal feelings affect your work. Yi Mubai smiled faintly. I don't need to explain the reason to you. Anyway, it's a decision. I can only apologize, Miss Lu. With that, he asked Secretary He to send her off. Lu Man's lips trembled as she said one last sentence. Don't you care about the past? Yi Mubai sat behind his desk and looked at her quietly. After a long time he suddenly said, When Yuan and I argued before, and I thought she was overthinking things. She was too sensitive. Now I think I was wrong. He paused. I won't hire an artist who doesn't separate work from work. Miss Lu, I wish you a bright future. Lu Man's voice was hoarse, and she was gritting her teeth. Aren't you afraid that I'll give what I have to win Yuan? She raised her head. I believe that no woman would be indifferent. Yi Mubai still sat quietly and looked at her. There was disappointment in his eyes. Also his love and admiration for Wen Yuan. They were both throwing a tantrum, and throwing a tantrum. His Wen Yuan was so classy because she was targeting her man. But Lu Man was simply unreasonable. Yi Mubai's voice was cold. People who don't follow the rules in this game have to be taught a lesson. I don't mind that Wen Yuan knows about it, and I know I can't stop you. But Lu Man, if you do that, you'll probably have to go back to America. King Entertainment won't accept you either. Do you believe me? King Entertainment's Qin Mo and He Huan's marriage had always been lukewarm. At this time, how would Qin Mo dare to marry such an ambitious female celebrity with a notorious record? He Huan hadn't forgotten about his past. And unfortunately, he had a small deal with Qin Mo. If Lu Man dared to do it, he would let her know the consequences. Lu Man said coldly, I don't believe it. Yes, you don't believe me because you think you're popular. But things are different now. You should know what happens to a female celebrity who loses her popularity. If no one asks you to act in a movie, how are you going to maintain your reputation? Lu Man, maybe you don't care. Maybe you want to go after Wen Yuan. But I'm her husband. I'm only telling you not to provoke her, because of our old relationship. Yi Mubai's voice was very cold. Lu Man laughed so hard that she almost burst into tears. You love her, don't you? You said before that you didn't love any woman. You had so many women at that time. But you said you didn't love any of them. You actually fell in love with such an ordinary woman. What's so good about her? In terms of looks, figure and talent, how can she compare to me? Yi Mubai smiled faintly. Because she is Wen Yuan, and you are not. Lu Man chuckled. All right, let's see if she can still be a loving couple after she finds out about you. Lu Man was determined. If she couldn't get it, she would destroy it. After she left, Secretary He looked worried. Co Yi, should we stop her? Yi Mubai leaned back in his chair and shielded his eyes with his hand. He sighed. No need. He put his hand down and said, It's good that Wen Yuan is living outside. Let her vent her anger. There's one more chapter. I'll update tonight. More updates will be added later. End of chapter. Chapter 40-50. When he had lost his memory, he had been abroad. Wen Yuan actually knew about him, but she hadn't asked him. Actually, Wen Yuan was a very smart woman who could distinguish between right and wrong, and Lu Man was indeed a bomb planted in the past. Secretary He looked at his boss and smiled faintly. Lu Man walked out and got into the car. She was extremely indignant. The assistant didn't dare to say anything, but the manager gave her a very loyal suggestion. Lu Man, while King Entertainment is still offering you an olive branch, make your choice. Lu Man gritted her teeth. I'm indignant. She bit her fist, took out her phone and dialed a number. And Wen Yuan picked up the call. Half an hour later, Lu Man and Wen Yuan sat together in the cafe downstairs of the Four Seasons Hotel. Wen Yuan was wearing a suitable dress, his long hair casually tied into a bun, and he looked very lazy. Lu Man, on the other hand, was exquisite and charming. She stared at Wen Yuan and said in a puzzled tone, You're actually staying in a hotel? Yes, we'll be living apart soon. Isn't that what you want to see? Wen Yuan smiled. Lu Man didn't smile at all. She said coldly, Wen Yuan, this is just your trick. You just want to keep Yi Mubai firmly in your hands. Wen Yuan lowered his head and drank his coffee. Lu Man thought he was feeling guilty. Am I right? Yes, you're right. I'm doing this to improve the quality of our marriage. Miss Lu, what I want to ask is it wrong of me to do this? Yi Mubai is the man on my list of partners. What I do has nothing to do with you, right? But he's a man, not a thing. Lu Man lost her poise. You can't be too selfish. Wen Yuan still chuckled. Miss Lu, have you become stupid from acting? Do you think this is a romantic or bitter drama in your TV series? Am I the evil old and ugly first wife? You have to be clear, he's indeed not a thing. But he's my man. As long as I'm willing, he'll be my man for life. Lu Man's expression was very ugly. After a moment she smiled coldly. You should know that I have a history with him. Wen Yuan flipped his hair. I heard from Shirley that when Mubai lost his memory, he found a lot of bedmates. Miss Lu, if all of them come to me, I'm afraid I won't be able to handle them. Yi Mubai alone won't be enough. Also, let me give you a piece of advice. If a man really has feelings for you, he would have taken action a long time ago. There's no need to wait until later. It's a little unsightly to be one-sided. Don't make things difficult for yourself. You're still you without a man. Lu Man clenched her fists. So you're not going to give in? Wen Yuan was amused. How can I? Divorce him first and let you marry him. Miss Lu, it's 2019 now, and arranged marriages are no longer popular. Even if you want to beg, you have to find Yi Mubai's parents, not me. After Wen Yuan finished speaking, he stood up. There's nothing to talk about. Oh right, this cup of coffee is on you, right? I didn't bring any money. Lu Man was furious. Only then did she realize that Wen Yuan was not a little lamb. Actually, how could anyone who came from a family like the Wen or Yi family be simple? If there was, it was probably because of Bai Xueli. Fortunately, she was lucky enough to marry Yi Mubai. Usually, she didn't need to do much, she only needed to provide manpower. Wen Yuan couldn't do it. There were so many women in Yi Mubai's blank section. It was a headache. She walked forward, and Lu Man said from behind, Do you believe that I will expose intimate photos of him and me? Wen Yuan stopped and turned around. As long as Miss Lu doesn't find it embarrassing, you can expose it. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 40-51. Lu Man was stunned. She murmured, I don't believe it. I don't believe you don't mind. Miss Lu likes to slap herself in the face. Why should I stop her? Wen Yuan laughed. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that I don't rely on my fans to make a living. Mubai runs a film company, but he's not an artist right now. This kind of scandal won't affect him much. So if Miss Lu wants to do something like this, I don't mind. As long as you're happy. With that said, she went upstairs to pack her things at home. Even though she was a little worried about seeing Lu Man, she still had to live apart and start a new life. Lu Man looked at her back and smiled coldly. That afternoon, the top search on Weibo was #Star CEO's new love and old love. There was a photo of Lu Man and Yi Mubai kissing on the streets of France. Of course, that was a photo from before. But there was an article saying that Mrs. Yi had moved out of the love nest. All the reporters surrounded Yi Mubai's villa. If they moved, they wouldn't be able to leave. Wen Yuan didn't know if Lu Man was smart or stupid. She sat at home and looked at Yi Mubai. There are a lot of reporters outside. Should I move or not? Yi Mubai pulled her over to sit on his lap. You don't need to move. Just move. Let's go together. I won't respond to anything else. I'll slowly send your things over. After all, we're a weekend couple, right? Wen Yuan looked at him. You're so nice. He pinched her face. Don't have an affair. Kong Qiao and Bai Jingxian, stay away from me or I'll be jealous. The photo of you and Lu Man is what makes me jealous. Wen Yuan snorted softly. In the end, Lu Man didn't dare to release the explosive photo. Otherwise, she would be crushed into pieces. She was only doing this to disgust Wen Yuan. Of course, Wen Yuan wouldn't be angry because of this. It was fine as long as Lu Man stayed away. Moreover, Lu Man had hired a lot of internet celebrities to post articles for her. An artist could not compete with a company. In the afternoon, CEO Yi had spent a large sum of money to write Lu Man as a mistress. The situation was not good for Lu Man. In this way, Wen Yuan had nothing to be angry about. She reached out and tugged at his tie. I won't leave tonight, okay? Yi Mubai looked at her and smiled. You don't want to go? There are so many pairs of eyes watching. Let's do it tomorrow. After class, I'll go there directly. You can go there after work. Even if we're photographed together, there's nothing to write about, right? Wen Yuan looked at him. Yimubai thought about it and agreed. He reached out and rubbed her face. In other words, you forgive me? There's no such thing as forgiveness. I won't pursue what happened before marriage. What I care about is your attitude. Wen Yuan pinched his face. I'm hungry. I want to eat. Yi Mubai immediately ordered the kitchen to prepare it, and then carried the two small ones over. Yi Hui ate happily, and then looked at her father. Stepmother, do you want to eat with us? President Yi stared at his daughter. After a long time he said gloomily, next time call him over. Thinking that Bai Jingxian had always been drooling over his wife, President Yi felt very unhappy. How could little Yi Hui know her papa's feelings? She continued to eat happily. Yi Mubai looked at his son. Xiangnan was stunned for a moment. Why was his papa looking at him? But he was a very smart child. He immediately understood and nodded vigorously. I'll educate little Yi Hui. President Yi nodded with satisfaction and said to his wife, Xiangnan is like me, and Yi Hui is like you. Wen Yuan was not stupid. He looked at him and asked, which aspect? IQ and EQ. President Yi happily showed his white teeth. Wen Yuan said, oh. Then he said to little Yi Hui, Papa said you're stupid. Yi Hui's eyes were wide open like black grapes full of tears. She looked at her papa. Her eyes were full of hurt, and then she burst into tears. Papa was so bad. He actually said that the baby was stupid. Wen Yuan's voice was very gentle. Let Papa sleep with you tonight and coax you to sleep, okay? He's wrong. So he has to coax the baby to be happy, right? The way President Yi looked at his wife was very different. Wen Yuan smiled faintly. I'll sleep with Xiangnan. President Yi casually poured a glass of red wine for himself and looked at Xiangnan. Boys. Xiangnan's little face was full of desire. But at the same time, he was a little unyielding. Boys have to sleep by themselves. Yi Mubai nodded with satisfaction. I told you that he's like me. Xiangnan's little face was still red. After a long time he finally said, Papa is also a boy. In the future you won't sleep with Mama, right? Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 40-52. Yi Mubai's old face darkened. Yi Xiangnan was still looking at his papa. Daddy is also a boy. Boys have to sleep by themselves. CEO Yi seemed to see his wife smiling. He gave her a sidelong glance, and then very patiently said to his son, Dad is a man, different from a boy. When a man has a wife, he naturally has to sleep with his wife. Otherwise, how could you and Yi Hui be born? He thought that his son would stop at this point. But Yi Xiannan was like him, and could infer other things from one example. That means that if Daddy continues to sleep with Mommy, you will always be able to give birth to little Xiannan and little Yehui. Xiangnan made an analogy calmly. CEO Yi thought that there was nothing wrong with what he said, so he nodded. In theory there is nothing wrong with this. Xiangnan made another inference. That means that if they don't sleep together, there won't be little Xiangnan and Yi Hui. Yes. CEO Yi frowned. Yi Xiangnan quickly made a decision. So Daddy, you and Mommy shouldn't sleep together. We have 2 children at home. CEO Yi. Hey, we can use protection. We can use contraception. But it was too early to say this to a child who was only a few years old. He touched his nose and looked at his wife. Wen Yuan held back her laughter. Ah, yes, Xiangnan was very like him. Yi Mubai looked at her again. After finishing his meal, he carried little Xiangnan upstairs to educate him. Wen Yuan and Yi Hui slept together. She washed Yi Hui white. Her little body was soaked in the pink bathtub. Her big head and small body were especially cute. The bathtub was custom-made from Disney. A small bathtub cost hundreds of thousands of yuan. Everything in the nursery was designed by Yi Mubai for Yi Hui. Wen Yuan knew that it was because he wanted to love this child. He didn't want her to grow up thinking that she was born to save Xiangnan, and that she was loved. It was probably because he had given a lot of love to the children, that she couldn't bear to give up on him. Yi Hui was 3 years old. Her ear-length hair stuck to her cheeks. She held the bubbles and blew them in small mouthfuls. She was very happy. Wen Yuan accompanied her. Yi Hui tilted her head and said softly, Mommy, are you going to live outside in the future? Can brother Xiangnan and Yi Hui live with you? Wen Yuan smiled. You can stay with Daddy on Monday and Friday. We can spend the weekend together, okay? Not good, little Yi Hui said resolutely. Her little face was taut and unusually determined. Wen Yuan was stunned. Then he looked at little Yi Hui and asked, why? Little Yi Hui was drenched. She crawled out of the pink bathtub and into her mother's arms. Her two chubby little hands hugged her mother's waist. She raised her little face and said, because I want to be with Mommy. I want to be with Mommy from Monday to Friday, and the whole family on the weekend. Wen Yuan laughed and reached out to pinch her little face. Mommy will have a hard time like this. Baby, be good, Yi Hui said coquettishly. She rubbed against Wen Yuan's arms and cried. Wen Yuan's heart was incredibly soft. But she still had to discuss it with Yi Mubai later. She comforted Yi Hui for a while and helped her finish bathing. Then, she carried her back to the bedroom and helped her put on a little nightgown. She smelled fragrant and was cute. Wen Yuan also took a bath and returned to the bedroom. He came back late. There were still 2 more hours until 11 o'clock. End of chapter. Msp. Hurry up and read the latest update. Chapter 4053. Little Yi Hui was rolling around on the princess bed. She was going to sleep with her mother. Wen Yuan lay down, and the little fellow immediately arched over and arched against her chest, humming and chirping. Wen Yuan had no choice but to let her unbutton her pajamas with her little paws. It was a little painful. She lowered her head and wanted to tell Yi Hui, but when she saw the little fellow busy, she swallowed her words and lay down. At the door stood CEO Yi. His gaze was deep as he looked at everything in front of him. Wen Yuan didn't see him, and didn't know that he had seen everything. It wasn't until Yi Hui fell asleep that Yi Mubai walked over. He bent down and murmured, she's already so big. Why are you still allowing her to eat? Wen Yuan was startled. Then she saw that it was him. You scared me. She wanted to get up, but the little fellow was lying on top of her. She couldn't move for the moment. If she moved, she would wake the little fellow up. Yi Mubai reached over and moved little Yi Hui's little paws away. Then he carried her to the side and put her down carefully. Then he carried the child's mother away. Wen Yuan hugged his neck and said in a low voice, I promised Yi Hui that I would sleep with her. You already slept with her just now. He lowered his head and kissed her nose. Wen Yuan wanted to move away, but he wouldn't let her. Wen Yuan. He lowered his head and did the same thing as Yi Hui. Wen Yuan couldn't stand him doing this. He was afraid that the servants would come over in the hallway. So he pulled his hair and said in a very low voice, Someone will see us. Are you crazy? He chuckled and continued to kiss her. His voice was hoarse. The servants are all asleep. They won't come up to the 2nd floor easily. Besides, the people in the house are all old. They won't go overboard. Wen Yuan's hand slid down to his neck and touched his neck. Others have a sense of propriety, but you have to be careful. You're not at home every day, and I have to face them. He lowered his head and chuckled. Aren't you going to move out? Why don't you be louder tonight? Anyway, I'll be the one facing them in the future. He kicked open the master bedroom door and carried her in. He kissed her as he fell into the soft bed. Wen Yuan bit his neck. If you do this again, I'll really run away from home. He chuckled and kissed her lips hungrily. Then he murmured, You can't bear to. He really ran away. Where else can you find a man who can satisfy you like me? He lifted her up and kissed the corner of her lips. Isn't that right, En? Wen Yuan thought of something. He looked at his jade-like face and bit his lower lip. Yi Hui wants to stay at my place. Yi Mubai frowned. What did you say? Wen Yuan resisted the urge to bite the pillow. His eyes were moist and his face was turned to the side. He panted. That's why I'm asking you. He leaned against her and whispered in her ear. It's too hard on you. After all, there are people at home who have to do the housework. Wen Yuan bit his lip. It won't be too hard. I used to do it too. It's just that sometimes when I'm too busy, you have to help me take care of them. He pulled her up and held her in his arms. Wen Yuan harumphed and bit his shoulder. After a long while she said, What do you say? He didn't answer her question. What about our married life? Do we have to add another day on Wednesday? Actually, he could tell that Wen Yuan wanted to take the children out. but he was worried that it would be too hard on her. End of chapter. Chapter 40-54. After a round, Yimubai lay on the side and calmed down for a while. Then he looked at her and said, "Add another round of married life on Wednesday. Otherwise, there's no room for discussion." When Yuan was speechless. In the end, it seemed to be settled. In the end, when Yuan didn't know why she insisted on moving out. They only lived apart for 4 days a week. How could it be called living apart? But in Yimubai's heart, he had a different thought. If they lived in a smaller place, and he got off work earlier, would their family be closer? Would the quality of their marriage be better? He wanted to give Wen Yuan a better life. In the past, he thought it was about material things. But Wen Yuan didn't seem to care about these things, so he wanted to give her a lot of love and warmth. Yimubai calmed down for a while, and pulled her into his arms to kiss her again. Wen Yuan misunderstood, and thought that he wanted to do it again, so she reached out and pushed him. "You've had enough. I don't have the energy to accompany you anymore." He raised his eyebrows and smiled. "I just want to kiss you. But if Mrs. Yi wants more, I can accompany you." "Wen Yuan, I don't want to talk." Xiao Yi smiled gently and held her in his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her, like an animal about to lick off a layer of her skin. Wen Yuan finally couldn't stand it anymore. "Go to sleep. Stop it." She whispered again, "You're so old. I don't know where you get the energy." He hugged her from behind. "I've been hungry for a few days. Can't you eat enough meat?" She turned around and hugged his waist. "Let's go to sleep. I'm tired." She wrinkled her nose again. "It still hurts a little." Yimubai put down his hand that was on her shoulder and sighed. "All right, go to sleep." It was a busy day the next day. After sending the child away, Wen Yuan drove to the new apartment. The apartment was not the one she found before. Because Xiangnan and Yi Hui were there, they changed to a 200 square meter apartment. At first, Yimubai said it was small, but she said it was enough, so he reluctantly agreed. The furniture and household items were all complete. It was very cozy, and the decoration was also very tasteful. Wen Yuan liked it very much. She went to the supermarket to buy some daily necessities, and put them in the fridge. She also bought a few bouquets of flowers, and placed them everywhere. Just looking at them made her feel happy. At noon, she casually made some food, but she didn't expect that Yimubai would come before she could eat. She opened the door, and was very surprised. "Why are you here? Didn't you say you would come?" He had 2 trunks, one large and one small, in his hand. "I went home, and packed a little for you and the children, to make do for a week." Wen Yuan took it from her. "Have you eaten?" He smelled the paella. "You made it?" She nodded. "I made quite a lot. It's enough for 2 people. Do you want some?" "Of course." Yimubai took off his coat, and threw it on the sofa. He sat at the table and didn't forget to ask, "If I didn't come, who were you going to give the extra to?" Wen Yuan looked at him and said very slowly, "If there's no one to eat it, we'll feed it to the dogs." As soon as he finished speaking, he pinched her face hard. "Wow, you dare to call me a dog." "I didn't say that. You took it upon yourself." Wen Yuan snorted. "Yimubai, are you going to eat it or not? If you don't eat it, I'll really feed it to the dogs." Yimubai stared at her, and then suddenly smiled wickedly. He ground his snow-white teeth. "Okay, I'll feed you something later." Chapter 40-55. He suddenly felt that it was a good idea to move out. This place was close to his office, and it would only take a 10-minute drive in the afternoon. She was alone at home, and had no servants. It was the best place to commit a crime. After Yimubai said that, Wen Yuan glared at him. "Yimubai, if you continue to be like this, you don't have to come anymore." He reached out and pinched her little face. "If I don't come, who will satisfy you, Wen Yuan slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me." Yimubai smiled and started eating. Wen Yuan looked at him, and saw that nothing had happened. So he lowered his head and started eating too. When they were about to finish eating, Yimubai said in a low voice, "Come with me to the charity dinner tomorrow night." "Ah!" Wen Yuan exclaimed. She finally remembered and nodded. Yimubai touched his lower lip, his gaze quietly landing on her face. It was quite scary. When Yuan looked up, his voice a little hoarse. Nap. When Yuan didn't fall for it and said softly, I'll pack up. But Yi Mubai had already carried her and headed towards the master bedroom. We will have to live separately from now on. Don't you think we should make up for the rest? He was so shameless that when Yuan was speechless, Yi Mubai was satisfied and went to work. He even met the reporters downstairs. They surrounded him like sharks that smelled blood. CEO Yi, I heard that you and Madam are living separately. What happened? CEO Yi, will you and Lu Man rekindle their old love? CEO Yi, I heard that the woman you love the most is Miss Lu. Is it true? Can you tell us? Yi Mubai opened the car door but paused and turned around. My wife and I did move, but because this place is closer to our child's school, we can continue to live here. As for the woman I love the most in my life is my wife, the mother of my child. Who else could it be? As he said that, he sat in the car. He was very tall. After he sat down, all the reporters noticed that there was a fresh strawberry on his neck. It was quite a warm feeling. The reporters took pictures of him. Yi Mubai left. Wen Yuan also had classes in the afternoon, so he came back in less than half an hour. The reporters were busy taking pictures again. Then, they came to a conclusion. CEO Yi and his wife were still in love, and they took the time to have a baby. In the afternoon, this title went viral on all websites, and even caused Weibo to be paralyzed. The main reason was that when Yi Mubai was sitting in the car, the kiss mark on his neck was too tempting. With this kind of speculation, Starlight's stock price also rose to its upper limit. In the evening, the #1 trending topic on Weibo was hashtag how much is Yi Mubai's hickey worth? It had been buzzing for a long time, and people didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Fortunately, they finally got rid of the influence brought by Lu Man. Just as Yi Mubai had said, King Entertainment had not signed a contract with her. Lu Man had committed the biggest taboo in the industry. If she continued to be seductive like this, she would be collectively blacklisted by the directors' wives. Although Lu Man's acting skills were good, she had only acted in entertainment films. She didn't have any commercial films to show for. Stars Entertainment and King Entertainment were the same. What they wanted was a combination of acting skills and popularity. Moreover, Lu Man was too old for variety shows. When she found out that King Entertainment also rejected her, she was dumbfounded. In the end, she broke a lot of things and locked herself at home for a day. Chapter 4056. Lu Man also appeared. She had specially made herself look extremely beautiful. She wore a silver evening gown that accentuated her delicate curves. She looked like a goddess. She wanted to let Yi Mubai know that she was more beautiful than Wen Yuan. She was much more outstanding. However, men did not look at women this way. Lu Man looked too uptight and was far less approachable than Wen Yuan. She was only wearing a white Chanel top and trousers, and her hair was tied up casually. She looked very young and approachable. She looked especially compatible with Yi Mubai when she stood next to him. This time Lu Man lost. When a man married a woman, it usually meant that he wanted a wife, not a celebrity. Beautiful women all looked the same. The only difference was how thick the makeup on their faces was. Lu Man's face was very thick. Wen Yuan's face, on the other hand, was clean. Lu Man was competing on the red carpet. But what she didn't know was that the winner had already been decided. And Yi Mubai didn't even look at her from beginning to end. He only had eyes for Wen Yuan. When the banquet started, Suemo squeezed to Wen Yuan's side and whispered, I heard that Lu Man is miserable now. Wen Yuan smiled. She's rich and pretty, how could she be miserable? Suemo leaned over and whispered, I just heard that King Entertainment rejected her. I really don't know what she was thinking when she played such a good hand so badly. Wen Yuan didn't say anything, he just smiled faintly. Suemo was very worried, so she leaned over and whispered, Don't tell me you're soft-hearted again? Why would I? Wen Yuan took a glass of red wine and handed it to Suemo. Do you think I'm such a kind person? Suemo studied her face for a long time before spitting out a few words. You look a lot more treacherous. Wen Yuan reached out and pushed her. Stop it. You're the profiteer now. The home of love was boundless tonight. And they were also making a lot of money. They just had to wait for the donation segment. 1 Yuan and Su Mo were talking when the MC suddenly called out names. Let's welcome the director of the Home of Love, Miss Su, and our spokesperson Bai Jingxian. The host's voice became even more enthusiastic. You two are still wearing matching outfits today. Please welcome Bai Jingxian and Miss Su Mo. Bai Jingxian looked at Su Mo and extended his hand in a gentlemanly manner. Su Mo naturally took his hand and went on stage with him. As the director, Su Mo was naturally the first to speak. She was also from the entertainment industry, so she did not have stage fright. She expressed her gratitude and then played some charity videos. All the celebrities present did not make a sound and watched quietly. Su Mo explained softly, "My dream is very simple. I just want everyone in B City to have a home. I want every homeless person to be able to find a place to rest when they're tired. It's the same for our animals. One day, we don't have to see puppies and kittens frozen to death on the road anymore. My dream is very simple, but I need money. I'm a tacky person, and I do tacky things. I'm not that noble, but I'll be very happy to see them have a safe and warm place." The audience applauded, and Su Mo's eyes became misty. Bai Jingxian, who was beside her, put his hand on her shoulder and gently hugged her. This was a very kind gesture, and because of Su Mo's kindness, he liked Su Mo's character and felt that she lived quite freely. Bai Jingxuan's thoughts were different from others. He did not think that Su Mo was tired. On the contrary, he felt that Su Mo's life was controlled by herself, and it was very wonderful. So what if she gave everything? So what if she had nothing in the end? Such a girl was worthy of a very good man giving everything for her. Chapter 4057. Just as Bai Jingxian was hugging Su Mo, Kong Qiao and Wan Yun arrived. Kong Qiao had just come over from the first program when he saw Su Mo and Bai Jingxian on the stage. He also saw Bai Jingxuan's paw. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the paw. Su Mo's eyes met his, and the corners of her mouth moved slightly, but she was still interacting with Bai Jingxian on the stage. Bai Jingxuan's expression was a bit playful. It seemed that some people were jealous. Bai Jingxian suddenly said on the stage, "I know that many celebrities have volunteered to donate money tonight. But before the official announcement, our principal Su has something to auction as a token of her gratitude for everyone's support for the Home of Love." It was clearly blood-sucking. Only Bai Jingxian could describe it in such a fresh and refined manner. Su Mo was stunned. When did she say she wanted to donate something? The most valuable thing she had was a pair of earrings. But they were only worth a few thousand yuan. How could she auction them? Bai Jingxian smiled slightly. The highest bidder can dance with Miss Su Mo. The starting price is 1 million yuan. In fact, it was not important whether they danced or not. What was important was that they wanted to be in the limelight. Tonight's event was quite big, so there were still people who were willing to dance with the flat princess. When Yuan, who was beside Yi Mubai, whispered, "Take a picture." Yi Mubai was a bit speechless. "You want me to dance with another woman? Take a picture and I'll dance with her," Wen Yuan said without thinking, and then leaned on his shoulder. "Yi Mubai, don't even think about it, not even Su Mo President Yi kissed her. What Mrs. Yi said is also what I want to say. That's it, okay?" 1 Yuan. While they were talking, Bai Jingxian had already bid 2 million yuan, and he looked at Kong Qiao with a very provocative look. The little puppy versus the old bacon. The atmosphere suddenly became tense and warm, and even Su Mo didn't know that he had suddenly become a hot topic. She asked Bai Jingxian in a low voice, "How did I become a hot topic?" Bai Jingxian smiled charmingly at the banquet hall below and said to her in a low voice, "What hot topic? You think too highly of yourself. It's just 2 pancakes. You didn't expect it to be so valuable. 1 million yuan. Su Mo wanted to strangle him. "Your mouth is really poisonous. You should use toilet cleaner to clean it. Introduce the brand of your supermarket. Sell a bottle for $5 and get a free brush." She also gritted her teeth in a low voice. Bai Jingxian smiled proudly. "No need, just use your tongue." Su Mo glared at him. However, her childish and ferocious gaze made it seem as if she was flirting with him. Bai Jingxian met Kong Qiao's gaze, and deliberately grabbed Sumo's hand. Kong Xiao raised his hand. 3 million. Wang Yun whispered. Are you crazy? You already had a scandal with her before. Do you still want to draw fire to yourself? Concho ignored her. Bai Jingxian beamed. 5 million. He turned to Suemo and said, Kong Xiao will lose 1,000 drops of blood today. For a celebrity to attend this kind of banquet, it would be enough to donate 1 or 2 million. But this dance was not so easy to dance. Hugging and hugging, he bet that Kong Xiao would not be willing to let Suemo accompany other men. As expected, Kong Xiao immediately said, 6 million. Wang Yun's voice was full of surprise. Are you crazy? Money is nothing. Don't you want your future? Kong Xiao acted as if he didn't hear it. After Bai Jingxian announced another set of numbers, he said 10 million in a low voice. Chapter 40-58. There was an uproar. Even a blind person could see that Kong Xiao was interested in Suemo. And now all eyes were on them. Lu Man had wanted to show off, but seeing this scene, she felt that she wasn't as good as a chicken, so she left dejectedly. Wen Yuan noticed, but she pretended not to see it. As for Kong Xiao, everyone gave up after he showed up. Only Bai Jingxian wouldn't let him go. He calmly offered 15 million. 20 million, Kong Xiao said. 25 million. The little puppy smiled. 30 million. Old Bacon didn't hesitate. The little puppy shrugged. 49 million and a kiss. 50 million, do you want it or not? Otherwise, I'll ask Suemo to wash my teeth. Kong Xiao clearly knew Bai Jingxuan's trick, but he still didn't hesitate. 50 million. Suemo was startled. She looked at Kong Xiao for a long time without saying anything. Bai Jingxian smiled. Looks like I can only go to the supermarket to buy one get one free. Suemo looked at him. He was still smiling. Suemo, running away isn't a problem. Face it head on, and you'll find that it's actually nothing. He leaned forward and whispered, Go old Jianbing auntie. Suemo almost glared at him. When Bai Jingxian left, he kissed her on the cheek. Being kissed by such a little puppy in broad daylight, even Suemo, who thought that he was a bit frigid, felt his HP return to full, and his HP was rapidly dropping. But she soon fell into another warm embrace. It was Kong Xiao. Bai Jingxian stood to the side, still smiling, but there was no smile in his eyes. Suemo suddenly realized that she didn't understand Bai Jingxian at all. She let Kong Xiao hug her and dance in a daze. Kong Xiao's voice was very low. Suemo, Bai Jingxian isn't someone you can provoke. Suemo looked at him. Concho put his arm across her waist and held her. It was not a proper position for a dancer. It was rude and possessive. It was the first time he had behaved like this in public. Bai Jingxuan's family isn't someone you can marry, Kong Xiao murmured. Promise me stay away from him. Suemo was taken aback, and then he turned to look at Bai Jingxian. He was watching her. Behind her, Concho kissed her. However, as soon as his lips touched hers, Suemo pushed him away. The atmosphere was a little warm and subtle. Everyone saw that Kong Xiao had been rejected. Coupled with the previous scandal between the male and female leads, it was really hard to resist watching a good show. Wang Yun had long left in anger. When Yuan hugged Yi Mubai's arm, is Kong Xiao taking things too hard? On such an occasion, he was simply showing that he liked Suemo otherwise. Why would he spend 50 million for a dance? Yi Mubai smiled. He's not crazy. He was provoked, just like me at that time. Pausing for a moment, he continued. Older men are most afraid of little puppies as their love rivals. You won't be able to outlast them. When Yuan gave him a strange look, CEO Yi gave her a smile. On the stage, Suemo calmly said, Kong Xiao, you don't have to give me the 50 million, but I don't want to put myself down for this money. I'm not that kind. He was rejected. Under so many gazes, just like what Suemo had said, she wasn't going to sell it. Bai Jingxian grabbed her and trapped her in his arms. Before she could resist, his overwhelming kiss came. Buy one get one free. 5 yuan for a fully automatic hairbrush. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 40-59. Suemo was stunned for a moment before Bai Jingxian kissed her. To be honest, his kissing skills were really good. He kissed her from all angles, and the way he kissed her was beautiful, making Suemo feel like she was the female lead. She was floating. Just as Suemo was about to float away, a strong arm pulled her away and punched out. Kong Qiao, the violin prince of the music industry, the always gentle and humble Kong Qiao, was actually fighting over a woman. Oh, he had even offered 50 million for a kiss. Damn, this was too explosive. This was a battle between King Entertainment and Stars Entertainment. This was a male animal fighting for a female animal. This was a battle of fists against flesh. All the cameras were on them. There was no need to go on Weibo. The WeChat moments in B City were exploding. Kong Qiao and Bai Jingxian didn't have the upper hand, and were both injured. However, neither of them was humiliated. When the security pulled them apart, Bai Jingxian reached out and pulled Suemo over. Leave him. He's not the last one. Kong Qiao's eyes were cold. He didn't care that his gown was wrinkled. He looked straight at Bai Jingxian. Are you the last one? As long as she agrees, I can marry her right now. Can you do that? Bai Jingxuan's lips curled up. He was so handsome that the women at the scene screamed. Kong Qiao narrowed his eyes. Is she willing to marry you? Bai Jingxian looked at Suemo. Suemo had calmed down. Her voice was especially soft. Bai Jingxian, thank you. I know you're doing this for me. She shook her head. I won't choose anyone. She looked at him and then at Kong Qiao. Thank you for coming to the banquet. Then she turned and left. She left in a beautiful manner, without any reluctance. Bai Jingxian looked at her back, and then slowly turned back to Kong Qiao. You can't give up everything for her, so stay away from her. Suemo is a very good girl. Kong Qiao, you really don't deserve her. Kong Qiao sneered. Bai Jingxian, I thought you were really willing to give up everything. If I loved her, I would. Bai Jingxian looked at him. You're in love with her. Do you dare? He picked up his coat, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out in a dignified and disheveled manner. That night, Kong Qiao and Bai Jingxian flooded Weibo. The number of views was close to 300 million, and the number of discussions was 120,000. It was a new topic for this season. The last topic was about a certain celebrity having an affair. Of course, in the end, the enthusiastic but bitter fans actually formed a Kong Qiao and Bai Jingxian couple, hoping that Kong Qiao and Bai Jingxian could be together. Qin Mo and Yi Mubai stood together and clinked their glasses together, as if they didn't care about this absurd scene. Qin Mo chuckled. Boss Yi, is this a win-win situation? Yi Mubai also smiled. Bai Jingxian is a male artist who is good at creating hype. He usually doesn't need a team. Persona? Qin Mo nodded in understanding. Yi Mubai shook his head. He doesn't have a persona. His best persona is himself. If he wants to do something, he will do it. If he doesn't like it, he will do it. He's very capricious, but I like it very much. Qin Mo's gaze fell on Wen Yuan, who was not far away. After a while he smiled again. Well, I hope Mrs. Yi likes it very much. Yi Mubai, can't we have a good time? Can't we cooperate properly for once and form a CP? After saying that, Qin Mo was about to leave. Boss Yi was not jealous. He smiled. It's better than your wife running away. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 4060. Qin Mo looked at him. Who said that my wife ran away? She either ran away, or couldn't have sex with you once a year. Yi Mubai didn't give him any face at all. President Qin left with a sullen face. When Yuan looked at him and came over. Did you make Qin Mo unhappy? She didn't quite agree. Mubai, your mouth is getting more and more venomous. President Yi looked at his wife. Don't you want to know what he said to me? She gasped. There was actually a story. President Yi gritted his teeth. He said that you like our stepmother. Bai Jingxian. When Yuan asked immediately. President Yi gritted his teeth angrily. How dare you? He grabbed his wife with one hand, and left directly to go home to interrogate her. When Yuan felt quite miserable about this inexplicable disaster, the two children were sent to Su Fu's place, and he brought her back to the villa. Sitting in the car, when Yuan felt that something was wrong. Mubai, are we staying here tonight? He didn't seem so angry anymore, but his voice was a little cold. Yes. Then he got out of the car and opened the door for her. But in Wen Yuan's eyes, it was like a weasel paying a visit to a chicken. She had a strong desire to live. She took 2 steps forward. Mubai, if you have any thoughts just because of some gossip, I'll be angry, he said absent-mindedly. You can be angry after I vent my anger. I'll coax you then. It's over, Wen Yuan thought to herself. He brought her to the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. He wasn't in a hurry to strip her of her clothes as punishment. Instead, he took out 2 bottles of red wine from the wine cabinet. He sat on the sofa, took another wine glass and poured it. Then he looked at Wen Yuan. Come here. At this moment, his coat had been taken off and thrown aside. His tie was also unbuttoned, and the collar of his shirt was unbuttoned. He looked quite sexy. Actually, Wen Yuan also desired him like this. She also wanted him, but she was a little scared when she saw the 2 bottles of red wine, and refused to go over. Yi Mubai sat and looked at her quietly. Do you want me to come over and pull you over? Wen Yuan bit his lip and went over. He sat opposite him angrily. What do you want now? Yi Mubai smiled. Truth or dare? Wen Yuan thought that she wouldn't lose all the time, so he relaxed a little. But in the next second, she realized that she was really naive. Caught off guard, he leaned over and pulled her onto his lap. Her hands were tied with a tie. In just a few moves, he had tied her up firmly. She had even wrapped her arms around his neck and sat on his body in a very embarrassing position. Wen Yuan twisted a few times. Yi Mubai, you pervert. Actually, before they did it, he rarely had any special hobbies or tricks. Yi Mubai was considered a traditional man. How many tons of explosives did he eat today? Wen Yuan said angrily. I haven't argued with you about Lu Man yet. Aren't you thinking too much? Yi Mubai chuckled. After tonight you'll like it. He reached for the glass and put it next to her mouth. Do you want to drink it, or do you want me to feed you? Wen Yuan gritted her teeth. I don't want to drink it. Yi Mubai didn't say anything else. He directly raised his head and drank half the glass. Suddenly he kissed her lips. Wen Yuan's eyes widened. She wanted to struggle, but her body couldn't move at all. She could only accept it. The dark red wine dripped down the corner of her mouth and slid down her neck. It was a little uncomfortable. Yi Mubai kissed her for a long time and finally let go of her. He also cleaned up the wasted wine. He wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. On WeChat he followed Yuta literature. Talking about life, looking for confidants. Chapter 4061. He looked at Wen Yuan's intoxicated expression and chuckled. I told you you'd like it. Wen Yuan's breathing was restrained. Yi Mubai, you bastard. Her face was flushed because of the red wine she had drunk, which was very attractive. She was slightly drunk, but she was still conscious. Yi Mubai didn't want her to get drunk so easily. It wouldn't be fun if she was really drunk. The man held her chin and kissed her for a while, then said, Wen Yuan, have you ever liked Kong Qiao or Bai Jingxian? No. She shook her head. He smiled and held her waist with one hand as he poured another glass of red wine. Wen Yuan said quickly, My clothes are dirty. Put me down. I'll go change into another set of clothes. If it's dirty, I'll just take it off. He gave her a warm smile and poured the wine down her neck. Wen Yuan screamed, Yi Mubai, you bastard. The wine flowed everywhere, and the fragrance of the wine filled the air. It was a little intoxicating. He leaned over and murmured, Do you love me? No. Her eyes were red with anger. Put me down. She couldn't take it anymore. She wanted to move away, but he really held her down and didn't let her move. His voice was low and hoarse. I won't be able to take it anymore. I still have to interrogate you. Wen Yuan gritted her teeth and said, You pighead. He chuckled and said slowly, Is that so? It seems that you haven't suffered enough. Wen Yuan watched him take another glass of wine and almost screamed. He was too perverted. Half an hour later, Wen Yuan lay on the bed, and Yi Mubai hugged her from behind and kissed her back. Can you tell me the truth now? She bit her lips. There's nothing to say. Can you tell me if you love me? He nibbled on her small shoulder, and finally asked the question he wanted to ask tonight. Wen Yuan was stunned for a moment before he was turned around. Do you love me? Huh? He slowly whipped her. Do you like me doing this to you? She closed her eyes. I'm not young anymore, but it's still the same. Not young anymore? Is it not enough for you, Mrs. Yi? He held her chin, picked up the glass, drank half of it and fed her. That night, when Yuan didn't even know how much red wine he had drunk, half of it was drunk, and the other half was wasted. Yi Mubai also drank a lot, but he didn't seem to feel tired after drinking. That night, when Yuan felt like he was going to die, she really couldn't afford to provoke an older man. The other side, after Suemo left the hotel, she went to a small bar alone and drank some wine before returning to the apartment. It had been a long time since she had a drink, and tonight was the perfect night to drown her sorrows. It was just like one of the nights when she had lost something. She took her medicine and sat alone on the road, drinking and crying for a long time. At that time, she was in love with someone and loved him like a fool. Although he said those words, there was always a thought in his heart that he wasn't like this. Suemo opened the car door and got out. She saw Kong Qiao leaning against a tree, smoking and looking at her quietly. It made her feel like she was a drunkard who had returned home late at night. She was still wearing the evening gown that she hadn't had the time to change into, and she wasn't in the mood to do so. She looked glamorous in front of others, but she was actually very pathetic behind the scenes. Kong Qiao walked over and frowned. You drank. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.